The story begins with a blow to the face of a blue girl. I ask you, Lady Vesti. After that, she collapsed with the whole body on the carpet, shouting in pain, trying to rise. The black-haired girl sharply stopped with scissors and broke the hat of the maid. Perfectly. The pale blue strands of hair were scattered on the floor. Stop. After that, Shatenko, smiling at an oily, said, "You are even more suited to you." The girl with snow-white hair bowed her head embarrassing, feeling guilty. Excuse me, ladies. Everywhere on the floor chaos, immediately remove it. I don't want to see any of your hairs in my house. The maid quickly tried to rise, grabbing a headdress which was tangled in her hair. In addition, the brown hair cast a slight look, crossing her arms on her chest and not taking her eyes to make sure that the fair-haired man would disappear as soon as possible. I like warm water in the wash basin, the maid said when she left. If you forget again, I will cut all your hair. The girl with the sense of guilt came out into a gloomy, empty corridor and listened to the threats of her lady, and then plunged into thought. The girl's fair-haired girl believed that she was still lucky and that everything was good. Mr. Paul's daughter, Vesti. She boldly overcomes any obstacles and always achieves her goals as she is the daughter of a tavern owner. Standing a little, Ola finally settled in bed and closed her eyes. The next day, he promised to be difficult, so it was necessary to relax a little. Despite the fact that the morning sun had already painted the sky over the city in bright colors, streets and lanes remained deserted. Somewhere nearby, roosters roosted loudly, notifying the beginning of a new working day and it's time to get up. This train was a place where I spent most of my life. Girl of light hair began to gather to go. An orphan that has no penny in your pocket. She quickly wrapped the apron, carefully tying it on her back with a bow. She poured cold water into the bucket, cleaned, prepared, and fulfilled all the responsibilities. The father of leading, Mr. Paul, showed generosity, protecting me. The maid was constantly cared for. After giving Vesta food, she left. But the problem was that no one paid for my work. The girl was very exhausted from constant work. From time to time, it became so difficult that she just wanted to escape. She welcomed everyone and said, "Welcome. You will have 2 people." But she realized that escape does not mean a better life. Through the festival, the attractions are crowded. It's good that it is delicious here. So I need to make every effort. To avoid images, a girl of light hair rotates like a protein in a wheel. You need to prepare food for guests immediately. Your hair is sticking out a little bit, Lady Vesta exclaimed, causing her attention. Crushing the apple, she pointed her finger. She was indignant. You touch your hat with dirty hands. Sorry, she replied. You can't even imagine how dirty you are right now. The official quickly pulled his hand. I don't want to eat through you. Wash immediately. The blonde quickly executed the order. Exactly. Looking into the mirror, she tried to wipe the dirt out of her face with a cloth. The spots, however, did not disappear. She looked boldly at her. Hide your hair. There is information that someone asks for girls with silver hair. Want to know? Someone is interested in these girls? This was confirmed by news. Why do I lie to you? Do you know Eddie? It was he who told me about it, the maid thought. Although she is only 13, Vesti already knows a lot. The lives of poor girls always look like. They can become maids if they are lucky. And if not, fate will make you live like ghoulers. After the death of the mother, they told me. I am absolutely unhappy in my life. Despite this, I need to stay in the tractor. A warm and nice evening is spread over the city. Almost all the windows were already lit, and silence prevailed on the street. Meat counters. Congratulations, Josephine, said the maid as she approached one of them and noticed a familiar woman. Good afternoon, Ring, she said. I have a couple of pigs, as usual. What, again? What is the floor spending so much of your money? What, still beats? Rin replied that it was no longer like before. It means that it still loses. Knowing how he treats you, I cannot withstand his actions. Josephine filed a package. I put more than usual. Snack secretly when there is no floor. The girl thanked again and announced, before the meeting, when she was about to leave the counter. Take care of yourself, the saleswoman replied. The saleswoman plunges into melancholy, thinking about the past. Her gaze reminded her mother as if she were her mirror. Josephine continued to weave memories. When she remembered the happy days she spent her mother, her face was a smile. But I have not seen her smiles since her mother died. Wonderful child. She constantly monitored her mother. The girl's fair-haired girl quickly wandered between the shelves with the basket, looking carefully at something. Suddenly, she heard a cry. Rin. After she looked around, she felt a light touch on her shoulder. Ness, Rin exclaimed. A blinding guy waved in front of her. Congratulations. Do you perform the task well? Yes, we have ended products, she replied. Since you settled in the tract, we rarely see our own, the man said. Suddenly, Minos stretched out a few sticks with meat. He said, On, keep. The surprised girl looked at him. He replied, I can't. I should go back before the group starts looking for me. Try a little. It will only take a minute. Poor pits. I think they will disappear soon. If someone could take these kebabs out of me. Finally, Rin gave way to reaching the boy. I am very grateful to you, Minos, she said. He gave her kebab with caution as jewelry. The red-haired boy looked at the girl and laughed. He said, Take more, I have a lot. Okay, thank you. Rin smiled. Life sometimes makes me unhappy. I'll treat you next time. But the boy quickly answered. Ryan announced that she would become a chamber of nobles. Will we no longer see? I need to learn, so I can't come often. And every time you say, I hope you will spend time with me, as if for support, I ask you to promise to me on the little finger. She looked at the boy with tenderness and anxiety. Life always gives me something I look forward to. The white-haired man answered Minos, clamping his little finger, saying, Yes, I promise you. Don't worry about me, Mom. As for the other, it may be necessary to disappear for a few days. Are you talking about those men who are looking for girls? She asked. Carefully, the guy asked, How do you know? Rin replied, We told me this. And what did she find? She told the boy that it is better to be careful now than to regret. Thank you. I'll be careful. Be careful. And you too. The girl quickly ran to the tavern and closed the door loudly. I came back. She exhaled, breathing hard. The man, harsh and angry, suddenly grabbed her cap. He removed the headgear of the ring and rushed to the floor. The girl could not understand where she wandered for so long. She covered her face with white hands and stood defenseless than her husband. Her hair squirred. I apologize for late. Did you hear? Look at it. Who did you look for? The unhappy silver-haired, blue-eyed fool. The girl was surrounded by two men who were dressed in traditional black suits, and they began to watch her carefully. Perfectly. She has golden hair. The floor was nervous. Where is the guaranteed reward? Suddenly, he got a bag of money. Thank you, sir. Why did you get frozen? He asked, turning to the ring, hiding the bag in his pocket. Go for them. What it should mean? Rin asked in surprise. You didn't understand yet, isn't it? Sarcastically asked Lady Vesti behind, approaching quietly. You now have a new master, Vesti continued, smiling. Stupid, someone bought you from us. Don't drive me out. I plan to wash twice a day. Don't even feed me. Quietly, it's not in my power. Paul replied sharply. Please, Mr. Paul, the girl asked, pleading, grabbing his pants. With one movement, the man struck the girl's fair-haired girl, and she fell on the floor. Come out, wretched. I warned that silver curls would bring trouble. Vesta laughed. If you become a lover of an old aristocrat, do not forget about me. The tractor door closed when the girl leaned in her arms and tried to get up. Raising, Rin looked at the two sex men who stood in front of her. Silver-haired girl, tapping one of the men, quietly touched one hand to the other. Sir, what happens to me? The girls who were dressed in the same outfits looked at each other nervous, but they did not answer questions. The evening was cool, and the sky covered a variety of clouds. And why not get us in a carriage first? They asked unexpectedly. Bright overflows glowed with the blue roof and gilded window frames of the elegant palace. You went a considerable way. You are walking skeleton, skin and bones, said the woman, rubbed the girl with silver hair until red. In the hot bathroom rested. In this condition, it will be difficult for you to serve Lady Elizabeth, the woman continued. The girl was carefully dressed in a black and white outfit of the maid, leaving her shoes. She carefully evaluated the result. Good. The girl was dressed in a modest black dress with a lush long apron, and there were shoes on her feet. The fair-haired light was appreciated by a woman who helped her transform. Now you look much better. The table, filled with a variety of dishes, stood in front of the girl. Be healthy, you will definitely need strength. The ring approached the table, putting her hand to her chest. It looks delicious. 9 carefully extended their hands to a variety of dishes. Do not rush to not resist, the woman said, looking at her with a smile. War and dinner by schedule, she added, smiling. The ring rapidly attacked all the dishes. You have to provide Lady Elizabeth. What should I do? What the lady herself should not participate. I am called Julie. Come in when you're hungry. I will gladly prepare you delicious, the girl replied, smiling. Thank you, Rin thought. I am not sure that I will do everything right. But life in the duchy may not be so bad. The sun's rays have already poured high vaults of the palace, creating a charming atmosphere, and the birds were circling in the sky with flocks, complementing the picture with brightness. I was ordered to serve Lady Elizabeth. However, a week has passed, and I still didn't meet her. The girl plunged into thought. Unexpectedly for me, life in the estate was much quieter than in the tractor. Not many days have passed. I brought the girl you ordered, Lady Elizabeth, the man said. Let me introduce myself. I am grateful for your meeting, ladies. My name is Rin, she said, smiling. Remove the cap, the lady asked. The girl agreed obediently. The hostess carefully examined the silver strands of the girl's hair when they appeared. This is so miracle, I thought. A charming girl with black hair appeared in front of a fair-haired, dressed in a red velvet dress. From the sudden movement, the eyes of the Lady Elizabeth opened, and earrings on their ears were pumped. Rin just watched. Do you really have silver hair? The girl asked. Yes, ladies, Elizabeth replied. You are very attractive. Did you say your name is Rin? The lady asked, taking a silver-haired girl in her arms. You should always be with me, Ms. Elizabeth said, raising the girl's hands. Do you know? Then she went a little further and smiled the newcomers. We meet in the lesson, Rin said. Yes, ladies, the girl replied. Ms. Elizabeth left the girl's room and the servant followed her. You're extraordinary, Marvine, she said. He said he was very grateful. The girl carefully removed the handkerchief. You are right. Her hair is as silver as the hair of Her Highness of Regina, she smiled. Everything is becoming more exciting. I believed that my work was only to create a lady. Lady Elizabeth, did you perform the task I have instructed you last week? She replied to this. Yes, of course. The mentor scattered. You made the same mistake again. I have to punish you. Persecution? Rin uncertainly turned her gaze from Lady Elizabeth on her mentor, looking a little frightened. Stunned by the fact that someone suddenly took her to her, the girl looked at her hands with surprise. The ring was unable to open her mouth when a familiar woman who suddenly waved her hand on her suddenly appeared in front of her. At the same moment, the body of the maid was overflowing with fear. She was scared because her hands would soon get a blow. Rin connected her palms, carefully examining the wound, which now burned pain. How does it taste? The girl stood near one of the trees and thought out aloud. She said she would consider the task next week. The girl sat down and leaning her back on the tree trunk, breathing. A light breeze blows through the herds of her dress. Thoughts rushed. Thus, my responsibility is to bear punishment instead of my mistress. Due to the fact that the governess has no right to punish a noble woman, they are looking for someone who will take responsibility. Every time I was punished, Lady Elizabeth had fun in her palm. She was always interested in watching it. Rin leaned. Although I did not expect such work, it's still better than working in ham, Rin summed up, saying, I accept punishment instead with the hope that it will be pleased with Lady Elizabeth. Sudden herbs and leaves trembling. Who are you? Asked Rin's mysterious guest. When she looked up and rubbed her eyes, she saw a dark-haired young man in a black tuxedo. The sun blinded her eyes, so she could not clearly see the face of the young man who tormented her. You have a face in your blood, said the stranger, leaning a little to the Rin, putting her blue handkerchief on her cheek gently. The stranger gave the girl a handkerchief. I didn't expect someone to do here. It's my secret place. Rin sat fascinated, thinking that she was here that she met that wonderful young man. Seeing him, the beauty god would definitely be doomed. For the first time, I met a young Lord Martin right here. The girl with silver hair sat on the grass, and the heir of the Duchy of Eriupu carefully wiped blood drops from her face. Rin could not understand the strange feeling that covered her. It looks like a butterfly screams in the abdomen. It was a feeling like light tingling and tickling. The girl asked what happened to her. It looks like she fell asleep. The guy was still in front of her. The ring quickly ran in the opposite direction to the palace. "I'm here, sir. With your consent." The girl sank on a shiny floor in a confusion, crossing her arms on her chest. With my heart, something is wrong. After a quick sprint, the girl raced quickly, breathing. "Lady Elizabeth, would you like to meet me?" Elizabeth was in despair. "Do you imagine how much time I called you?" she asked. "Excuse me, please," Rin replied, trying to justify. Suddenly, the maid felt a strong blow to her cheeks as she barely came. After that, the ring fainted and fell to the ground, leaning on his hands. "Why are you flying in clouds, girl?" Elizabeth asked, looking closely at her. "Sorry, ladies." The maid tilted her head slightly so as not to look at Lady Elizabeth. "I worked on you for almost a month. Her mood is often changing, and it is much more expressive than in the vesti. It can be in a bad mood throughout the day. At such moments as now, I only have to beg for forgiveness." "I apologize, ladies," Rin said, lifting his head. I decided to stop it. Lady Elizabeth crossed her arms on her chest and watched Rin, only sighing annoyed. What a stupid girl. What kind of homework, Luther, did the brownie give? The Bogretsky stated, "A study of the history of the flag of the imperial throne." "And why do I know about some flag there?" Lady Rin asked. "Please bring me some books." "What are the ladies?" Rin asked. "What are you doing? Books from history. Will I still have to remind you of it?" The frightened maid replied, "I'm leaving. Teaching me to read and write, Lady Elizabeth showed extreme kindness. At first, I am very grateful to her for it, but now she really wanted me to learn how to read and write. The more I studied, the more she translated my homework. Those orders were better than punishment from Luther's governess for ladies' mistakes for homework. I was able to get to the library despite much effort." Rin was extremely happy. "This is full books. Old pages have a great smell. Is it possible to find those historical books?" The Duke Library of Aeroput contains almost all editions of the Empire. I would have done it with great pleasure here all day, enjoying reading if I had time from work. Is it enough to read these books? As a maid, Rin was not sure how many books would be enough for the hostess. She thought a few minutes before she came to the conclusion that it is better to take another one. Behind the girl's back, suddenly a voice came, which she did not know. The surprise shuddered so much that she almost lost her balance. Rin was convinced that, slipping from a solid surface, it would necessarily fall and suffer serious injuries. However, this did not happen. Suddenly, Rin felt her waist carefully touched her hands. This saved her from falling to the floor. This was the young gentleman, and Rin immediately could not understand everything that had happened to her. The young gentleman looked at Rin, and a light smile appeared on his face. He said, "Sorry, I didn't want to scare you." Having shouted, the girl raised her hands, trying to calm down. "It's all right, young lord," she said with a slightly worried voice. The heart of a white girl was so loud in her chest that it seemed that she was about to jump. "You are looking for the basis of the flag of the imperial throne?" asked Martin. Rin nodded. Lady asked her to be given books. Martin continued the conversation, emphasizing that finding the books you need is part of the task. "Make it look like you didn't see me," Rin asked right away. The young gentleman carefully viewed the books. "These 3 volumes will not be enough. The task of agreeing with Luther is not easy." Outside the maid, it became uncertain, and she pressed one hand to herself as if trying to defend herself. "This is what it is. What should I do?" At first, the Rin did not notice that a young gentleman approached her. Martin went to the ring. She asked if they would like her to help. "Will you help?" repeated the young man. "Undoubtedly, I have already studied it before," he replied confidently. The maid was very confused with such attention and tried to give up politely. "I am grateful to you, a young man, but..." Trying not to scare the ring, Martin cautiously touched her head and removed his cap. "Remove the cap. Your hair is really charming," says Martin, admiring her gentle blue hair that falls on her shoulders like lace. The young man continued to speak, stroking the hair of the ring. "Have never heard that? Your hair is reminiscent of the Philpath. No one told me before. A girl from the people, but with hair, like a royal family hair. People constantly poke their fingers." Martin sighed heavily, putting his hands on his waist. Of course, you may not wear it if you don't like it. The mowing was overwhelmed by emotions, the cap unconsciously squeezed, demonstrating its determination to change. Young master, I'll do it. His blonde hair emphasized his strength and responsibility. I will fulfill your requirements. The young gentleman seemed to be a magical influence of this sincere, true desire. She is even more charming than I thought. Martin laughed. Although she is smart, why hiding such beautiful hair under a cap? Take them for reference, the young man said, passing the books of the Rin. The girl immediately became aware and expressed her gratitude. I look forward to meeting to admire your hair again, Martin said, smiling. Yes, the young lord. Rin quickly moved away. Martin watched the girl who quickly moved away while his hand, just lifted in a farewell gesture, gradually lowered. Is this a new person that Elizabeth brought? She has scars all over the body, including scars on her face. Even for Elizabeth, it is too much. But the young gentleman was still smiling, thinking about Lady's fair-haired hammer and admiring the landscape. His thoughts were only about the next meeting with Rin. I hope to meet her. But the situation with Elizabeth remained difficult. Luther had a frozen face and an angry facial expression. Lady Elizabeth, on the other hand, remained calm in this situation and did not show any signs of excitement. Rin nervously ran between the governess and the hostess, throwing the excited look in one direction. The growing tension was cut by the loud voice of the governess. I ask again, lady. And I hope this time you will tell the truth. You didn't do your homework, yes? Asked the governess, almost without a break. I didn't count on your level. You have clearly addressed the help of another person. I close my eyes to it, Ludwig replied. It's my job, said the lady quickly. And it's better than before. The bell of a broken glass of Elizabeth spread throughout the room, echoing in his ears. How did you say? Elizabeth boiled from rage. I am the daughter of the Duke Araput, and I have enough education to write wonderful essays. Have you dared to turn to my father? After such a bright and sudden outburst of anger, Lady Elizabeth made an effort to reassure a wave of emotions that captured her. The governess, who watched the lady even ago, sharply looked away. Apparently it's time to stop, she said mentally. Luther looked at the alarmed Rin. If I continue in the same spirit, this baby will not stand, he thought. So, the governess nodded. I understand. I trust you, ladies. However, this was not enough for indignant Elizabeth. Lady Elizabeth turned her head to her maid and confidently moved forward. Rin was timidly retreated. Mrs.? Suddenly, an unexpected attack was heard. Elizabeth returned to Luther. Maybe it's my fault, she thought. On her face, Lady Elizabeth shone a wide gunman. I'm deserving of punishment. Isn't it a Goverluno Luther? She addressed. The complete silence filled the room, broken only by the loud slaps and blows that Lady Elizabeth took with incredible stability. Other servicemen were amazed at this spectacle. They covered their mouths with their hands, unable to utter any sound. Enough, ladies. The words of the governess had a powerful effect. Elizabeth's hand immediately froze over the mutilated body Rin, but the lady remained indifferent to the trembling body of the girl. Enough? You said the essay is too good for my level. After that, Elizabeth rigidly grabbed Rin for her hair, attracted the girl to her, and said, I was disappointed and therefore deserve punishment. Lady bowed gracefully. I hope next time you will not be disappointed. I will make more effort and be more attentive. Luther said goodbye. The lesson is completed, ladies. Elizabeth also said, by the next time in class. By the way, Elizabeth returned to Rin and, clearly emphasizing every word, said, Don't even show me on my eyes today. Rin had no other choice but to hide from the piercing look of Lady Elizabeth. Yes, ladies, she replied, restrained. The loud click of the door was a signal to the action. Luther came closer. Can you get up? She asked. Behind her was the service. All is well, the ring. However, despite all the troubles, Rin smiled. I'm okay. Thanks for taking care of me. The girl dreamed of leaving this place as soon as possible, so she bowed slightly. I'll go, she said. Luther replied uncertainly. Of course. The maids were quietly exchanged. Why is Lady Elizabeth so fiercely hated by Rin? I will not understand what motives lie behind her actions. With each occupation, as well as the growth of the conflict between the governess Luther and Lady Elizabeth, the punishment became more cruel. How much will she hit the next time? I am scattered. The only place where I find consolation is the lake behind the estate. You need to hurry and get there as soon as possible. This is the only place where my sadness disappears. It is said that the previous Duchess of Ariaput was delighted with this place. Rin, exhausted with running, carefully sank on her knees. It also gives me peace. There is no soul here. Rin touched the surface of the river, and each of its motion radiated peace. The girl gained more water, gently washing her face so as not to hurt herself. How sad is it? I just dreamed of winning Lady Elizabeth's affection. But probably this dream will remain impossible. The mistress's face was distorted by a sinister smile. She struck the poor maid on the face so that her cheeks were grinding. Elizabeth, angry to the border, stood with a curved face. "This naughty girl spoils everything," she exclaimed. The maid sat on the floor, confused, suddenly said that her silver hair was reminiscent of someone else, but did not agree, leaving the opinion in the air. Maybe my face is reminiscent of Lady Elizabeth, someone she despises. That is why she probably treats me. The black girl sat on the lake and wept. In her head, the thoughts were swollen that such reflections are not able to change reality. I will spend the rest of my days like that. When I was first in the duchy, I had hope for a better life. The girl dropped under a spreading tree, hiding her face in her knees and breathing hard. How I hate it all. Suddenly, someone asked, "What exactly you hate?" The girl was embarrassed and could not understand what was happening. "Look up," came from a height. On the branch of the tree was the same stranger and greeted, "Hi," for a long time. "I congratulate you, the young master," said the maid, looking closely at him. She was somewhat confused with surprise. The young master approached her face and asked, "What is your face?" "Your cheeks are red and swollen. Did someone hit you?" "No, it's not," the girl replied, covering his swollen cheek with a pale hand. The young man did not look away from her eyes. "Is it a matter of Elizabeth's hands?" the young man asked anxiously. "Nothing like that," a embarrassed girl replied with determination. "Is it worth asking for it?" thought the young man. "No need, my lord," Rin replied in a confusion, grabbing his shirt. "Turning to Lady Elizabeth, you will create a bunch of problems," warned the girl, holding firmly beyond the edge of his shirt. "Why are you silent? Tell us what happened. I promise to keep your secret," the young man said worriedly. "Close if you agree. Shake your head if not," the young man insisted. Elizabeth stood in front of him, but Rin remained stationary. The young prince turned away from the maid, who at that moment leaned against his back. Having played on patience, he asked quietly, "When will she finally understand everything?" The girl replied, "In fact, everything is fine with me. If you talk, it can turn serious problems for me. Please understand me right." The girl plunged into reflections. "I cannot open the truth because she is not cool, younger sister, Mr. Martin." Young Mr. Martin stretched out a maid candy. "Here, try it. Please like you to appreciate it." "Thank you, sir," said Rin. But he reacted, "How can you thank me if you don't even know what it is?" The girl could not calm down. The guy carefully put his hand on her head and promised to treat her every time. The kindness of the most beautiful guy I have ever met has made my heart a trembling. Violence was the only form of interaction between people I was failing. Pain and fear have become an integral part of my existence. The young master became the first and only person to treat me with kindness immediately after his mother's death. People gathered in the garden. The owner asked, "Are you feeling bad?" Your face blushed. The girl replied, "It's okay." The owner noted that the temperature of the parish is normal and playfully approached her lips, caused her confusion. She pushed him away, saying, "No, all right." "I am glad to hear it," the young man replied with a charming smile, looking away. The young man lifted the girl's goodies. "What is it?" she asked. "This is chocolate," he explained, adding, "Taste, it's incredibly delicious." The girl put a piece of treats in her mouth. Her eyes shone with joy. The taste was charming. It was a real miracle. The young man smiled and said, "Do you see how incredibly delicious?" To which Rin replied, "I have never tasted anything like that." "I am glad you liked," said the young gentleman, gently stroking Rin on his head. She thought, He's kindly touches me. Rin thought. I cannot understand whether my heart is so madly beating through chocolate or through the magic smile of a young owner. Martin leaned down and asked if she was going to leave because she was delayed here. The girl looked into his eyes and suddenly burst. I go, a young master, before the meeting, the girl said, and the master remained standing, answering her a friendly smile. Perhaps I am clever again, but this is not so important. I was able to spend time with a young lord, the girl thought. Meanwhile, the guy was left in the garden under a tree. As soon as the girl disappeared from sight, the smile disappeared from Martin's face. The gentleman squeezed his fists from annoyance and thought, it is unfortunate that the next meeting with the charming Rin will not happen for a long time. Lady Elizabeth was probably still in bed, Rin was thinking, going to the palace and tying a handkerchief on her head. The maid opened the door to the room. Fortunately, Miss Elizabeth was still aspirations, calmly sniffing at the bed. I have to ensure that the lady is in a good mood. Otherwise, she will start throwing everything she happens at her hand. The young lady muttered something in her sleep. Water, water. The maid brought her a glass of water directly into bed and said, Here, my lady. The Duchess, taking a glass of water, asked in surprise, Where were you? She allowed her eyes and paused, waiting for the answer. I thought you would follow me immediately. You imagine how uncomfortable I was without you? The lady said with a touch of dissatisfaction. The young maid realized that it was not true, because Miss Elizabeth had already numerous servants. I noticed as Margil followed her before I went to the garden. However, it should not be annoyed, Rin said. Without giving her true thoughts, Rin politely replied, I apologize, ladies. Elizabeth swung her eyes and asked, Where did you go? I was in the kitchen, ladies, the maid replied. Why? The mistress asked. I ordered for you snacks. Appetizer? Am I the same as a non-thief as you? The hostess smiled, and the maid thought about herself. I should predict it. I know that you love quenelles, mistress. Good. Bring me a few pieces, the hostess replied. Hi, Rin. Visited the delicacy for the lady? Asked the friendly grandmother, noticing the cheerful mood of the girl. Yes, you can give me those cinnamon cakes I mentioned before, Rin asked. I assumed that you would come for them. Here, hold. The blonde old woman got another item and handed the girl. Here, it's for you. The maid responded, Oh, it was not worth it. Well, it was not so bad today, said the young maid, throwing the ironic funny of Seeruk Cook. It's time for you to go until the lady became angry, the old woman said. Thank you to the meeting. Rin's gray-haired, the old woman thought. Poor Rin, such a good and hard-working girl, and the lady for some reason treats her so indifferent. It is better if I went with you, another maid suggested. No, lady insisted that I came myself, Rin replied. The maid thought, why was I sent to the forest alone at such a late night? How much has passed? 30 minutes ago, lady reported that a guest who loves strawberries would come soon. After that, she ordered me to go to collect berries. Lady Elizabeth, with some hint in her voice, asked me, Please go to collect the berries on your own. It's a simple task, right? Usually this case is done together, but I am sure that everything will be okay if I hurry. The girl was full of hope. Who knows, maybe I will be lucky again to meet the young owner. However, from other maids I learned the news that worried me. Mr. Martin will soon go to the academy, the maid thought. Unfortunately, now I will not be able to see it often, but suddenly heard a rush from behind the bushes. Someone hid in the bushes. Is it possible that wild animals are found there, as I was warned? Rin thought. The girl sat down for the bush and inadvertently stopped. Shurchite became loud. No, someone, help me, she exclaimed. From afar, the bell of the wheels came. A carriage was rushing. Elegant and elegant, she flashed in the sun, and strong horses with a hoof overcame the rocky road. A mustachioed man came out of the carriage, reassured the horses, and asked the servants with the question of what happened, because the hooves stopped unexpectedly. I apologize, sir. From the forest came a cry that scared the horses, replied the mustachioed cart. A pretty guy with blue eyes and a green suit sharply opened the door of the carriage and turned to the driver. Shout, you say? From the carriage heard the voice of a fair-haired young man. We stopped through a cry? The driver replied. He stopped quickly. However, the young man had already begun to worry about circumstances. We are almost near the duchy, and I am sure that there is no danger from wild animals. However, at the same time, Rin, paralyzed by fear, was numb, feeling unbearable. Rin wanted to escape as soon as possible, but her legs, as if growing up to the ground, preventing a step. The sounds around were becoming more terrifying. What was the surprise of the ring when it was not a threat from its nightmares, but a regular deer? It seemed that the deer did not pay attention to the frightened girl, only slightly tilting her head in her direction. Although all the inventions of Rin were already far behind, her breath still remained frequent and restless. The unexpected rustle attracted the deer attention, forcing him to die and alert to the source of sound, while the girl was slowly recovering. Only when the steps of the deer began to move slowly, Rin finally felt that the control of her body was returning. Although she still felt anxiety, the meeting with Elena brought some relief, and the tension in her image was a little slept. Yes, just a deer. Rin leaned to the thrown basket from which the berries poured. No, too much time has passed. It's time to finish. The main maid was pleasantly surprised when she saw how many berries were collected. But you gathered the whole basket, she exclaimed with a smile. In response, the maid smiled warmly to the Rin. Why don't you rest? She suggested, but the girl waved. I still need to go to the lady. The maid was lost. How can a lady send you somewhere in such a late time? Rin did not even have time to respond. Two maids ran into the room, interrupting each other. Rin, here's where. Our guest has already arrived. The lady ordered everyone to gather. After that, Rin immediately rushed to catch up with the maids. Already arrived, yes? Quick reviews were heard. Dress. All maids looked flawless in their tidy dresses. For a long time, they bowed their heads in respect, greeting the arrival. And here was the guest of the same young man with blonde hair. His movements radiated grace. Lord Hargreaves arrived. It turned out that it was the heir to the Earl Hargroves named Philip. He greeted, They have not seen you for a long time, my dear friend. Martin was only happily smiling. And indeed. Lady Elizabeth hurried to hug the guest. Philip, Elizabeth complained. Why did you get so slow? I missed you. Philip just smiled warmly. Thank you for the warm words, Elizabeth. Then Elizabeth, moving away from Philip, with grace took the division of her dress. I invite you to go to the living room. One of the maids came closer to the ring, leaning and whispering, Of course, why he likes the lady. The maid leaned even closer. He is the complete opposite of Martin. Like a day and night. The ring nodded. You are right. The young gentleman radiates a dark aura thanks to his black hair and gray eyes, while Lord Philip is like a ray of light, bright and refreshing. The living room just started a conversation. Martin noted that the trip was apparently exhausting. Philip answered, denying, Don't worry, Elizabeth was upset. Didn't you miss me at all? She turned to Philip. I was also waiting for you to meet you, he replied, looking at her. And at the same moment, Elizabeth's face cleared and she connected her fingers. Just from these words, I'm happy. The maids who observed the side were amazed. After all, the mistress never laughs in their presence. Philip turned his gaze at the service. By the way, are you a new maid? Yes, with silver hair. Is she new? Rin, gradually aware of the issue of the air, shuddered. Philip's gaze was chained to her. And that's really? In the duchy, everyone is used to the color of my hair. I have forgotten that for the rest of people it can be strange. Philip touched his chin with his finger, plunging into thought. This facial expression was already familiar to me. After these words, the mood of Elizabeth began to deteriorate rapidly. With a feeling of irritation, she slightly bitten the lower lip. The loud cry of Elizabeth forced Rin to shudder even more. She clenched her hands on her chest, covered with fear of possible continuation. Philip, Lady frowned, casting her gaze on the Philip. Are the servant more interesting to you? We have not seen each other for a long time. Philip tried to reassure her. It's not so. After these words, Philip gently raised his hand, gently stroking Elizabeth on his head. Of course, you are always in the first place, Elizabeth. Elizabeth laughed, and her mood clearly improved, contrary to everything that happened. You almost made me cry with joy. The maids, together with the butterfly, sighed with relief, feeling the storm retreated. What a relief is. Philip continued. The forest is incredibly good. Elizabeth suggested. Let's arrange a picnic? However, Martin denied. Philip was only arrived. However, Philip had no objections to this proposal. I'm okay, I will be pleased to join. Elizabeth rejoiced. Perfectly, Lady hurried. Let's go on horseback, Martin suggested with interest. How far do you want to come in? He asked, and she replied, to the edges of the hazel. After that, Elizabeth confidently moved forward and step by step approaching the Rin. I instructed the servants to inspect the surrounding area. Lady stopped next to Rin, once again opening her true essence. I agree, Rin. You will lead us further. Feeling something suspicious, Martin closely followed Rin and Elizabeth. Of course, ladies. Everything will be ready for 11. Muriel apologized. Excuse me, Rin. I had to go with you. But Rin just shook her head. It's all right. Muriel expressed dissatisfaction. The basket is too heavy. Rin tried to solve the cause, perhaps inconvenient for two servants. Muriel breathed a lot. Thank you for your work. Rin smiled in response. I have to thank you. I am driving. They are already waiting for me. Elizabeth's hair gracefully in the wind while she kept her hat carefully. What a wonderful day. Elizabeth was still talking, but the steps of Philip and Martin have already been approaching. Fortunately, today the rain has bypassed us. Both Martin and Philip carefully dressed. Their clothes looked flawless. Philip asked, Are you ready, Elizabeth? Elizabeth exclaimed enthusiastically, You are too just unsurpassed. Philip nodded. Thank you, you look great. Meanwhile, Rin, a little tired, leaned on her suitcase. Noticing the fatigue on the face of Rin, Philip approached her. Let me help you. However, the girl barely smiled and replied, It's all right. Barely, the ring began to finish her speech as she suddenly escaped through a small stone and almost fell. The girl's fair-haired girl would almost fall down if it was not for the timely intervention of Philip, who picked it up. Philip immediately asked, Have you not injured? Ring only quickly removed, vigorously shaking her head. I'm okay, sir. Thank you for your help. It's not good. Hope I didn't get up to upset the lady. The anxiety has grown steadily. Lady Elizabeth's face remained unmoved. Frozen, in her eyes did not slip any emotion. Although the atmosphere began to strain a little again, the walk lasted. Everyone was approaching the destination. A small lake was quietly hiding among trees and shrubs. The first silence broke through Philip, being curious. Who would have thought that such a place was hiding in the forest? Philip turned to Martin with a proposal. How about settling here? Martin did not deny and replied, Let's. Rin, unable to drive a horse, was uncertainly pulled for the rewriters. What to do? I have never ridden before. Philip again offered his help Rin, reaching out. It's not so easy to go down, right? Take my hand. Philip continued. It seems that you have no experience of riding. There is a risk that you can get injured if you try to get off your horse yourself. The alarmed look of Rin was chained to Elizabeth, which, without taking their eyes from them, holding a renowned renown. Rin was excited, but she could not go down on her own, so I had to agree. Sorry. As it should be expected, the lady is not delighted. What is waiting for me when we finally get back to the estate? The variety of sweets was astonishing. There was so much that it would be enough for a real picnic. There were just a lot of food. Suddenly, Philip suggested, That's what. Join us. It made Rin a little discord. Sorry? She asked. The girl felt uncomfortable. I am so good, she said. But Philip did not retreat. It is awkward when you sit alone there. Elizabeth waved a cup. Rin, why not bring me a cup of tea? Rin immediately nodded. As you say. However, Martin spoke suddenly, who was still silent throughout the picnic. You don't have to bow so much. He calmly screwed his drink, barely clapping his eyes. Relax, here only we, he added, and addressed Elizabeth. Isn't it, Elizabeth? Elizabeth's face changed. Her plans were suddenly failed. You have the rightness, Martine and Philippe. Sit down, Rin, she said. In the lake, small fish with an extremely unusual pink color flooded in the lake. The chirping of rare birds on the branches of trees gave the forest of the charming atmosphere, combined with the noisy rustle of the leaves. And Rin found a real shelter here. Such peace prevails here. I am aware that it is only instant, so you should enjoy it in full. Philip addressed Martin. Are you ready for the academy? Martin asked, What do you need to prepare? Philip said again, Are you planning to join the Brotherhood, yes? Martin replied, This is not a place where you can only join your own. Elizabeth supported the conversation. I will be so lonely. Philip has promised. We will come for vacations. Lady Elizabeth was not satisfied with these words. Philippe, you have to visit me more often, she insisted. Rin hesitantly asked, Lord, can I stroll through the surrounding area? Elizabeth returned to her. Go. The girl did not go far from their picnic. She still heard the muted laughter of Elizabeth and the voices of Philip and Martin. After that, the Rin was stingled with her hands to each other. So, the young owner will soon go to the academy. The Imperial Academy of the Tron is also a military school. Girls do not accept there, so the young owner will have to go alone. Earlier, the days in the estate seemed endlessly long and exhausting, and no one had help. The presence of a young owner instilled in me. Every meeting with him was like a reward, like a ray of light in my cheerful everyday life. It was exactly the motivation that I was missing to support my existence and strive for life. Wanting to get rid of obsessive thoughts, Rin gently plunged her feet into cool water. You need to find peace again. The girl's fair-haired girl lifted her head, seeing the bushes of wild strawberries, and immediately remembered the words of Elizabeth. Philip will soon arrive. He loves wild strawberries, so I would like you to gather a little. Do you handle Rin? The words Elizabeth sounded in her head in Rin until she collected the required amount of strawberries. Now the berries will be enough. Rin was satisfied. I hope it will entertain the lady, she thought. But suddenly the voice of Elizabeth sounded. Where are you, Rin? Rin quickly responded. I'm here, ladies. Elizabeth returned to the sound of voice, looking extremely angry. Why are you... Elizabeth suddenly found herself next to the ring. Are you trying to experience my patience? The ring tried to apologize, but Lady interrupted her. To the hell! The annoyed Elizabeth was already going to turn around when she suddenly caught his shoes with a stone and lost her balance. Lady Elizabeth almost lost balance and was on the doorstep. Having frozen in indecision, she did not know how to save herself from falling. Carefully, at the last moment, Rin pushed Elizabeth, being in the water. The collected berries were no longer rescued. Noticing something unusual in Elizabeth's behavior, the girl rose concerned, calling her lady. Mrs. Rin came closer to Elizabeth, looking carefully at her dress to make sure her integrity. What a happiness that you didn't fall into the water. Elizabeth did not appreciate the caring attitude of Rin. Suddenly, with a sharp movement, she pulled her by her hair and pulled her. It's all because of you. How many times do I have to punish you to finally come to your mind? Who is the main one here? Elizabeth could probably speak without stopping, but suddenly she was interrupted by someone's sharp voice. What happened, Elizabeth? Martin and Philip, covered with real excitement, approached the Rhines and Elizabeth. We heard loud sounds, they said. The main question that was disturbed by Martin and Philippa seemed to hang in the air. Elizabeth was stood in their back. What is happening here? Elizabeth released Rin hair, choosing instead to grasp the collar. She said in a sweet voice, My dear. However, the sweet voice contrasted with the rage on the face of Elizabeth when she uttered these words. Everything is okay, Rin. You have all well? Elizabeth asked caringly, forcing her former dissatisfaction with a charming smile. Yes, lady. I'm okay, Rin quietly replied, looking at her lady, who changed instantly with the advent of the boys. Elizabeth, stretching a graceful hand, helped Rin climb from the grass and stand on his feet. The concerned Philip, who came with Martin, asked, Did you fall into the stream? Rin calmly replied, It's all right. You need to dry, Philip insisted. Elizabeth was jealous of this scene until Rin assured, You don't need to do that. I was dizzy. Elizabeth began to play its acting role. Philip said in surprise, Really? Can you rely on me? Can? She asked the lady timidly. I seem to have dislodged the ankle when I slipped. Only then did the young Mr. Martin pay attention to the red and slightly swollen foot of the maid. I think it's time to return, Martin suddenly suggested, surprised by others, especially with his sister. Everything goes scrape, not as I thought. And all this because of this stupid girl. With every second, the anger of Elizabeth has only increased. I will gather my belongings, Rin said, and nervously correcting the sleeve on the wrist, went to the plaid. "Let's solve the horses," discussed the boys with each other while the young lady bit the tip of the finger nervously, trying to hide her annoyance. Elizabeth could not contain herself, and her teeth nutted from the rage every time the maid appeared in front of her. "You ... Elizabeth straightened through her teeth, and Rin shuddered with fear, lifting her eyes to her mistress. "I dreamed of spending more time with Philip, and you destroyed everything." "Now just wait when we get home." Rin noted that it became even more stricter than before. Meanwhile, the boys have already raised their horses closer and vividly discussed what they would do after returning home. Rin politely asked, "Milady Philippe, do you accompany Lady Elizabeth?" Philip replied, "Of course, let's go with me." Hearing these words, Lady Elizabeth's face shone with new power, and anger dispelled, losing a light blush. "Wonderful work, Ring," Elizabeth said quietly, lightly patting the maid on her shoulder as a sign of gratitude. Philippa warned, "Don't hurry, you do not want to be injured." Elizabeth, laughing, answered his warning, "Don't worry, I will be careful." "I hope this is enough to avoid the hassle," Rin thought, rubbing her wrist again. Martin unexpectedly suggested, "Solace." Rin didn't believe her ears. "Sorry," Martin explained. "In such a state, you will not be able to return to the mansion yourself. You will go with me." The ring instantly rested with a blush from an unexpected offer. "But I can't accept it," she said. The lady was in a hurry, sitting on a horse behind the Philip. "Well, move faster. Do you want to make us wait for eternity?" The heart of the ring was beating loudly, ready to jump out of the breast. "Listen, ladies." She agreed not to evoke her anger. Finally, when everyone took their seats, the horses rushed from the place and left the estate. The Rin sat in front of Martin, allowing the wind to gently caress her face and dispel the silver strands of hair. Not knowing where to put her hands, Rin kept them on her breasts until her cheeks flashed with inconvenience. Looking back, the azure eyes dreamed of looking at the young owner sitting in the saddle. His black hair, slightly shaken by the wind, did not disturb the facial expression by any manifestation of tension. When the horse went into the gallop, the back of Rin periodically touched the breast of the young owner. Rin felt his breath a pleasant ear. Was that the impression of his warm breath on her skin or his body warmth? It seemed that the heart was about to escape from the chest, Rin thought, trying to calm herself. Finally, the day came. Rin rejoiced, removing the apron after exhausting work. "What a tired I am." As soon as the guest appeared, the work has increased significantly. The servants exchanged thoughts, noting that the maids are still easier. Yes, cooks work tirelessly. "Do you want to taste the pie with blueberries and cinnamon I used to grab?" "As I am glad that this long day finally came to the end," Rin thought, solving the apron behind her back. Suddenly, someone's hand touched her shoulder, pulling out of captivity. "I was waiting for you, Rin." A familiar voice came. It was Muriel. "Let's put off the conversation with Annie for later," she suggested. "I'm a little tired," but she noted that she has the desire to share something interesting. "Please join me," I ask hard. "It would be worth giving up, but I just can't," Rin thought. "Muriel always tries to help me." She replied, "Only for a short time." At night, when everyone was asleep, the girls were stealing to Annie's room. Lighting the path of a candle, they were quietly talking to each other. Having reached the necessary room, Rin and Muriel carefully opened the door and peered inside. In the center of the room, a candle next to which Annie sat was surrounded by other maids. "Here is Muriel of Rin." The mistress of the room immediately noticed their appearance. "What did you want to tell?" one of the maids asked. Until recently arrived girls sat on the floor next to others. "I have already said that Jeff recently searched me. Imagine in the garden he threw a wonderful white rose specifically for me." The maids were talking. "Do you mean a gardener student?" "These roses were so fond of the late Duchess." Annie replied. "It's just a rose," Annie continued. "He asked if we could marry next year." One of the girls asked, "Are you serious?" And then Anna touched her lips when a picture of that moment clearly came to life in her memory. He leaned closer to the answer, and when I nodded, Jeff slowly touched my chin and kissed gently. All the girls shouted at the surprise. Someone had groaned, others covered their mouths with their palms, rejoicing for a girlfriend. Rin and everyone scolded, plunging into reflections. Their lips met unexpectedly, uniting two completely different people. It was so sensually that I didn't want this moment to end. "How was it, Annie?" asked the collected around. "Touch your lips." They are so soft, isn't it? Now imagine what it is to feel the gentle touch of other lips. The ring touched her lips with the index finger, trying to understand what it is when the delicate lips touch each other. In the mind, the image of a young man immediately emerged. A gray suit, sewn to order, which makes it perfectly fit into the body. Hair, like a crow, and a sophisticated chin line, which reflects the features of the young aristocrat. Rin's thoughts were only one image. Mr. Martin, the ruler of piercing eyes that seemed able to look into the soul. The girl's cheeks were increasingly burning with shame. She could not break away from her thoughts, continuing to dream of her lips dreamily. I am curious to feel what it is. To be kissed. I am sure this feeling is sweet and tender. Is it possible that a woman and a man can connect her lips? It seemed to me something incredible and incomprehensible. It is said that when kisses in the body awakens some warm wave, but I can't even imagine what it can be. I wonder if these feelings will be as gentle and sweet as the chocolate that I was treated by a young gentleman Martin. At that moment, I sincerely dreamed of my first kiss with a young Lord Martin. The bright sun flooded the space around the majestic palace with its light, but in the air is still silence. There was a bouquet of flowers in the hands of the maid, which was more difficult than it seemed at first glance. She hoped that it would be enough to please the lady. After a picnic, I managed to avoid the anger of the lady. Elizabeth reflected, looking at her leg. And what to do with her now? I can't go anywhere after being fraudulent. Maybe it is worth creating a flower arrangement? Go, bring flowers. Rin was walking slowly, keeping her bouquet of flowers carefully, and said, I'm happy that the lady was not really hurt. After these thoughts, the shoes of a fair-haired girl suddenly slipped, and she immediately lost his balance. Feeling it lose his balance and the bouquet in her hands is anxious, the girl screamed. The voice is heard. Be careful. Rin immediately felt that someone's hand grabbed her waist, saving from falling to the floor. The black-haired young man held Rin firmly behind her back, looking intently in her eyes. Are you okay? He asked, full of care. The girl's silver hat made for a moment, not fully realizing what happened. When her eyes met with his eyes, the cheeks immediately got a blush. From excitement, her skin took a light sweat, and her eyes were opened. After a few second pauses, she said, Thank you, he said. It seems hard to you. Do you need my help? The maid replied, Of course not. I will be able to cope on my own. The young man was already going to go, but casting a look at the Rin with flowers, he said, As you say, then success to you. The girl, firmly pressing the flowers to her chest, looked timidly after a young man who was slowly moving. Lightly, she squeezed her eyes. She squeezed the flowers even stronger. In her soul, Rin was pinning, and she thought, he left. Slightly squeezing her pink lips, the girl was even deeper into thinking. No. So there will be no thing. I can't look away from the mouth of a young Lord Martin. Interestingly, what a feeling. To touch them with your lips. I understand that my desire will never come true. Ren dreamed of this guy, imagining them together. Her reflections were interrupted by a red flower that fell out of hand. Where did my thoughts go? She leaned and lifted him. My feelings for the master become stronger every day. I used to satisfy me just observation. But now I want something more. The ordinary maid does not even dream of a novel with a young master. I have to overcome this hobby. Martin pushed the heavy curtains, and the bright light with the triumph flooded the room. Time to climb. Philip was barely audibly said, muddy from the bright light. I am not sure that I can. Martin was dissatisfied and said, You wanted to hunt birds? Philip, desperately holding up for the blanket, shouted, I'm cold. Philip looked at Martin in question. How can I go if even out of bed is not able to go? He said. Martin stood on his own without retreating. I even canceled all the plans. He insisted. Sometimes you seem so heartless, Martine. You did not even blink an eye when I reported I was ill. Martin departed from the bed. You are such a coward. Once I will go alone, he said. Philip was surprised. What? Are you going to go on your own? Martin was silent for a while before saying, I plan to take a guide with me. Philip was surprised. Who is it? To which Martin was mysteriously replied, This is a secret. Quiet stab was in the ladies' room. Martin carefully announced his arrival. Elizabeth, I am entering. Elizabeth was distracted from her affairs, turning her head towards the open door. Yes, of course, she said. Martin raised the question. How is your ankle? Elizabeth gladly replied, Things have improved significantly. What brought you here? The face of a young master became more serious when he spoke. I have a request for you. Elizabeth looked confused. Do you want to address me with a request? Really? To me? Martin continued. I would like your maid to become my leader. Elizabeth asked, Do you mean Reen? Martin nodded as a sign of consent. The lady thought thoughtfully before announcing her final decision. Do you really want to take it with you? After that, Elizabeth again cast her gaze on Martin. She had to return soon. Martin said, So, I'll wait. While the maid served tea to the young owner, Elizabeth stared at him, trying to understand what was happening. There was something strange in this situation. Previously, his brother was never interested in any of the servants. What happened today that he suddenly asks to borrow my personal maid? Contrary to all expectations, Martin still got Rin as a conductor. Now they slowly traveled the forest, enjoying the shadows of trees. The horse moved so quietly that there was almost no steps heard. Rin firmly grabbed her hands with Martin's waist so that he would not fall out of the saddle. Martin cast his gaze back. Try to relax, he said. Rin shuddered, realizing that she was too firm. Rin immediately reacted. So I will do, young sir. Her thoughts were confused. But how can I relax at all? Returning to the lady after performing the assignments, I learned that she wanted me to become a companion of a young lord. In fact, I have to lead a young gentleman, but it seems that he himself finds the right way. The ring again clenched her fingers, trying not to bother the young gentleman. Rin's eyes caught brighter when she looked at Martin. She looked at his facial features unnoticed. The ring tilted her head and leaned more firmly against Martin's back, and she whispered almost inaudibly, Why are you so good to me? If you continue to put me to me, I can forget my place. And inadvertently start to wish you, young sir. A muzzle of the puppy appeared in front of them. Someone reached out and said, Wow, it looks like Louis followed us here, he exclaimed. Then Brunette said, I instructed Marvin to follow him. The blonde sat down at the puppy, but in the end, the boy stroked the puppy and, smiling, said, It seems he wanted to join us because he missed our picnic. A wonderful dog, said Brunet, standing next to the pet. The girl, looking back over her shoulder, laughed fun. What do I do now, sir? She asked. You can watch my hunt or walk, the boy advised. The girl was already intended to ask, but here she was interrupted by a brunette. Rest. And then he began to charge the gun. The guy turned and went away, just throwing over his shoulder. I know Elizabeth does not let you rest. Come here, Louis, Brunet said, calling for a friendly dog. The girl froze with surprise. She replied, Thank you, sir. And she thought, It's a pity that I can't ask why he is so good to me, but I have no right to ask him. The girl thought, watching how slowly the figure of a friendly man is moving away. Suddenly, before the eyes of a man appeared white, like snow, a bird. His plumage shone so brightly as if the sun's rays were reflected. The boy aimed at the bird, lifting the gun closer to himself. He sat down on the rings, dreaming of the perfect shot. At this moment, he seemed to disappear the whole world, leaving only dazzling feathers. Neither the bright sunlight nor the clouds over the horizon could distract his gaze. Then, in a few moments, the boy opened the second eye. The light filled his crystal blue eyes with a glow. I realized that I should take these feelings with myself to the grave. The girl looked thoughtfully at the majestic castle and the expanses around him. A lonely lady sat in the majestic castle. Her dark, long, and wavy hair framed a face that was full of harshness. The girl lowered her eyes and whispered, Although killed, but I cannot understand that my brother's head is going on. The older brother never showed interest in home personnel, and to me, she said, Why did he ask about this girl? At that moment, she remembered his words. It seemed that your maid was well known in the forest. Her reflection suddenly interrupted someone's voice, which carefully asked, Do you want another cup of tea, ladies? We have many employees. The brunette thought, enjoying another cup of tea. She gently closed her blue eyes. There is a reason why I was looking for a girl everywhere like a Rin. The brunette was looking at the tea surface. It embodies the image of the most revered woman of the empire. Regina, the only heir to the throne. The brunette plunged into reflections, staring at its reflection on the tea surface. My father always compared me with Regina. Remembering his screams, she asked herself, "Why can't you ever do anything right?" My father shouted, "It looks like you learned anything. Everything you do, you go somewhere and terrorize the maid. You will never get to the level with its highness," he exclaimed. "The princess seems perfect. It will become the first empress of the empire." The girl thought, remembering how she envied her during the points. I was upset, the girl thought, having fallen. Suddenly, they knocked on the door and she replied, "Come in." It was a maid with bright green eyes. She looked uncertainly into the room, dismissing the door, and turned to her lady timidly. "Lord Philip has wondered if you want to put him in a cup of tea," the maid asked. Lady said in surprise, "Great, I almost died of boredom," said Lady's blue-eyed happily, jumping out of bed. After that, she sighed deeply and said, "If I knew in advance, she would have time to prepare in the morning." The maid intended to deny. "What do I say to Lord?" asked the maid, to which Lady said indignantly, "What did I give consent? Do you not see that I'm getting ready?" "Don't stand like a statue. Go and pass my message," cried the brunette. The maid, embarrassed, quickly replied, "Yes, ladies." Suddenly, a wounded bird appeared before the eyes of a person. He was no longer breathing, all covered with blood. The blonde, with a high horror, leaned over the poor bird, widely opened their blue eyes. Behind her were a brunette and dog, she thought, admiring the beautiful feathers of the bird. Why did the owner shoot her if not intended for food? "Why do you look at the bird? Are you sorry?" the boy asked. The blonde, stamped, answered, "The thing is not about it." Then the girl calmly turned to brunette. "What do you suggest to do with her, sir?" He indifferently turned his gaze. "Can I bury her?" the maid asked, looking at the joyful Louis. "The gentleman just quit." "How do you want?" After that, after a while, a large amount of sand appeared in the girl's hands. She looked at the hole. "This is the only thing I can do for a bird, which has suffered such a senseless death," thought of a blonde. Then she frowned. On her face was reflected by sorrow. She again plunged into the reflection of a bird that reminded her, "My fate depends on the whims of others as well as the fate of this bird." She imagined the wings cut off the birds and felt doubts within herself. "Farewell, bird. Stir in peace," the girl whispered, looking at the makeshift grave topped with a cross. The brunette sat down on his knees and asked mildly, "Is it easier for you?" The blonde froze. "Not at all. She won't hear me," said the girl with a slight shade of the sum in her voice, trying to smile. She sighed deeply. "I lost interest in hunting," Brunet said, rising up from his knees. The girl looked at him with surprise. "But I don't mind staying longer," she said, the blonde too, getting up from the ground. The guy slowly moved away from the grave. The blonde lowered her gaze again and with the emergence on her face thought, what to do next. Apparently, I touched his feelings. "You look frightened as a bunny," laughed Brunet, turning to the maid. He stopped for a moment, looking closely at her. "And why not show you what do you do when you come to the forest?" the guy asked, watching the girl carefully. "Of course, sir. Although perhaps it seems to you not too exciting," the maid finally said. In this house, the maid was already preparing for something grand. They fussed, watching each other's work. Other maids have already carried food, services, and various silver appliances. Their faces did not express any emotions. These trays lay a variety of exquisite dishes, and there was no doubt about how much effort was made during their preparation. There was everything on the table, from miniature snacks to juicy main dishes. It seemed that they were literally shining. It was prepared for the holiday table. The man said, "You have not seen you for a long time, Philippe. I hope you felt at home." The brunette smiled nervously, delving into her thoughts. "Will the father go further and start discussing a possible marriage between our families?" Philip said. "Yes, I got a good settlement thanks to you." Another voice replied, "Indeed, my father." I myself watched this. The girl asked, "Yesterday we drank tea together and then walked in the garden. Did you like it so time, my lord?" Philip replied, "Outings." Elizabeth made every effort so that I do not feel alien, your clarity. But suddenly the father jumped to his feet, rolling with his fist on the table. His nervousness was noticeable even earlier. He asked sternly, clapping his teeth, "Elizabeth, do you not notice that Philip and I have a conversation?" She apologized and began to think. I realized that this was a great opportunity to get a father's sympathy. How could he disgrace me in front of Philip? The girl was surprised. The brunette is indifferent. The father is able to hold himself in his hands. Marriages are often arranged for profit, but sometimes betrayal occurs. However, families of Aruput and Hargroves are exceptions to this rule. Being allies for generations, they continue to retain common political views. They always support each other, really making every effort. The whole empire was aware of the close relationship between two prominent noble families. "How do you like here?" the Duke asked. "It's like my second home, Your High," Philip replied. Silence was hanging in the air. He looked at the guest. The elderly man said, "The other day I met Alex in the palace. He asked about you." Golden-haired did not stop smiling wide, sitting near the indifferent Brunote, and asked, "Father, what did you answer him?" The Duke replied, "I told your father that you spent a great time. By the way, you didn't go hunting yesterday?" Philip felt bad, so I went myself. Another boy interrupted. The man has frozen. "As a pity. Are you already feeling better?" the elderly man asked. "The holiday went to me, Your Highness," Philip replied. "So, did you go hunting yourself, Martine?" "How was it?" the father asked. "Everything was not so bad," the son replied. "I was able to move more freely in the forest," Martin assured. The girl watched carefully at their conversation. She clasped her eyes without stopping to eat. The girl thought, "Liar. You were with Lynn. He is deceiving," the girl thought, listening to the conversation. Martin knows for sure that his father will get angry if I intervene in a conversation. There is a significant difference in how my father communicates with me and my brother. I always stayed away. The girl remembered. Mom didn't get after my birth. He accuses me of her death, but the situation is out of control, she thought. When she was born, her father did not pay attention to her. He only desperately pleaded with a woman to open his eyes and return to life. My father never hugged me. Never, the girl remembered. He avoided her even when she was still a baby. He does not humiliate me in front of others. But she always avoids her. Even looking into her eyes did not dare, she thought. In her memory, his cold and distant look, as if frozen in the ice eyes which she so strongly tried to catch. But I know the truth. The girl thought every time she looked at him. Her eyes were exactly like her father. I know my father despises me. At first, I tried to invent new things to attract his attention, the girl remembered, but he was indifferent. The servants came and said politely, "Sorry, you're late, but why did you throw a glass?" She remembered that no matter how she tried to attract attention, breaking things, her father never heed her. This gave rise to rage. Each time she fused unrestrained, squeezing her lips, watching him remains indifferent. I got to things that are not easy to break. She held the glass firmly in her hands, not paying attention to the pain, remembering those moments. After a while, a butler entered the hall, clumsily dissolving the huge door. "What happened?" asked the old man. The nobleman leaned to him and began to tell something in a whisper, and he listened carefully. The man noted, "I have urgent cases that need attention. Enjoy lunch." The children replied, "Of course. I'm worried about meeting your father," Philip confessed. Martin replied, "I understand your feelings." Then Philip asked, "Elizabeth, did the maid go?" The girl asked, "Who do you mean?" The guy replied, "That girl with silver hair, she was with you on a picnic," Elizabeth gladly said, squeezing her dress. "You talk about Lynn?" Martin invited her to hunt, so I decided to give her a well-deserved weekend. Philip responded, "And here is our leader. Martin, what managed to hide today?" Martin replied, "But I was not hunting for a long time." "So, what did you do?" the blonde asked. At that moment, Martin remembered her words. "This is one of my favorite berries, though she is sour." "You seem perfectly understanding on the plants," Martin said, standing on his knees near the bushes with berries next to Lynn. Then the girl lifted the flower to her lips, smiling gently. My mom taught me that when she was alive, she said. Sorry, apparently I was tired of your stories. The girl quickly apologized to seeing the guy froze. This is not at all. I would listen to love, he said, not taking his eyes off the white flower that had just blossomed. Recalling this, Brunonet smiled relaxed. Finally, his indifference gave way to a new feeling. The boy crossed his hands, leaned with his elbows on the table, and, a little bit, replied, I found something much more interesting. Philip, with an unconcealed interest, asked, Well, tell me. However, Martin only replied, It's a mystery. The girl looked at them in surprise. Why does Martin smile? She thought a brunette, watching carefully at every movement of her charming brother. Father and brother cause me annoyance, said the girl. After a sharp movement, she rushed the box to the floor. What is going on? Why is Lynn? The maids whisked behind the back and the blonde, trembling with fear. I tell you the truth, the merciful, she assured the blonde, stuttering. Other maids whisked without understanding what was happening. It was not me, the girl repeatedly repeated. Others, standing behind, bowed their heads as if with fear of something unknown. It is enough to lie. You have touched the necklace last, pointed to the box with the jewelry of Millie. She repeated the blonde with fright, opening her blue eyes wide. I am not involved at all, she thought. I put a necklace immediately after a picnic. Where did it disappear? Before her inner vision, there was a magnificent, valuable creation. Muriel, you lived with Lynn, right? Letty asked. Green-haired girl, slightly frightened, replied, Yes, true. Bring me into the room. I want to check in person, she said strongly. The maid replied, You need to get permission from a senior maid. But suddenly, in just a few moments, a box flew into the maid. The girl tried to retreat. The brunette smiled contemptuously and said, Do I have to ask permission from a regular maid? Continue and take me away. And then a group of other maids who, talking welcome, came before their eyes. Isn't this Lady Elizabeth? What does she do here? The maids whispered, noticing the merciful at the door. Looks like someone got into the mess. What led her to the maid's room? The girls whispered when the brunette went on. But the blue-eyed girl suddenly opened the door of the crash without even waiting for the invitation. Her bold gesture was accompanied by a loud knock. Who was so determined to open the door? Is Lady Elizabeth? Two girls shouted, quickly dressing. Their views were full of surprise. It's not our room, Lady Elizabeth, the girl shouted from behind. The brunette faded her eyebrows and her eyes were lit. I'm not guilty, ladies, Lynn exclaimed again, looking back at a variety of things in the room of two poor girls. Then her attention moved to the hangers behind. She studied every little thing in the rooms. Please calm down, merchant, the maid insisted, trying to comfort the nervous brunette that has already started to shake. Get rid of me, she exclaimed the lady, sharply pushing the maid. After surprising her, she fell on the floor. But right afterwards, the brunette squeezed her throat with green eyes, which gladly said, Mistress, ask. Let go. Open the truth to me. Where is the room of this thief? She exclaimed her brunette, soaring a defenseless girl even more. But suddenly an unknown woman entered the hall. She was approaching quickly, strictly asking, What is happening here? Did this maid stole the necklace? Asked one of the maids, to which the other replied, She staged a real scandal in the rooms for the mountain. Who is the thief? Asked the senior maid. After receiving the answer, she exclaimed, Lynn, who divides the room with Muriel? She wondered that theft is a terrible crime for servant. However, Lynn has always been diligent. She would not do so. It is positive about it, always ready to take up the most difficult tasks without complaints. She recalled this when the maid assured, It's just a misunderstanding. The older maid said, Our opinion will not change anything. It is difficult to distinguish a thief from an honest person. Then the older woman noted that in justice, the service has no right to express her opinion against the will of the owners. Then the girl was roughly grabbed for her snow-white, like shining braids, from which she shouted in despair. Standing on your knees, Lynn begs again. Please believe me, Mercy. I really didn't steal your necklace. Suddenly, an older maid flew into the hall and demanded her voice with a determination. Millie, let her hair let go. All present froze in place. Brunette asked in surprise, "Did you indicate me what to do?" Her gaze was icy and the voice was harsh. The girl added, "Long stay in the post of chief maid has already driven you out of mind." The woman frozen in place. The woman was absorbed in reflection. If her luminosity was still among us, then Lady Elizabeth may be surrounded by love and attention. If everything was different, the lady would not turn into one. She may not find pleasure in bullying, thought the maid. The woman thought, she would not be destined to become a horror for maids, although it can be a source of fear. But now it has become a one who is afraid. If you did your job more honestly, the maids would not even dare touch my things, she said, letting Lynn release. Are you sure the necklace is really stolen, lady? Asked the woman when the girl came closer. The brunette wrapped her eyebrows and asked with distrust, exposing her teeth in a half-mixture. Do you hint that I am saying? The maid wandered her chin thoughtfully and noted, of course theft is a serious crime. I have no choice other than to inform his luminosity. He will punish the guilty, she said with determination that struck the mercy to the heart. The brunette clenched his fists, thoughtfully anticipating the consequences. If so, my father will expel Lynn and start to despise me even more. I do not think it will be needed. She cut off the brunette sharply, watching the blonde that was tears. The maid asked, what do I do? She was answered, she launches her in the eastern room until she regret her actions. Didn't you hear me? I ordered to lock it in the room. Again emphasized the noble lady, interrupting an older woman. She noted that there was no point in telling her father. Like a merciful hostess, she will not allow Lynn to be expelled. What was delayed? Enter it, cried the brunette, and the maid grabbed the blonde. But she asked in surprise. What? She shouted again. But I didn't take Aurelia. Why no one believes me? She exclaimed in despair. The maid calmly replied, I'll take Lynn personally. And the exclamation suddenly subsided. Before the eyes of the blonde, there was a pollinated, empty room. The door opened the maid. The girl tried to hold back the trembling. Her hair broke the wind, and Lynn plunged into reflections. I can't figure out why it happens. The elderly woman at the end said, Excuse me, Lynn. That's all I am capable of. The girl wept again. It really was not me. She exclaimed, the blonde, clutching at the maid who tried to move away from her quickly. The woman gently stroked her and said, I am sure that you are not guilty. Let's wait a little and see how the events will develop further. The maid said. Her eyes shone. She is convinced that Millie would change her mind soon and tried to throw a smile. She insisted, I'll come to you. Lynn only had to thank, and she was interrupted. I understand you're upset, but the worst is behind. And here the wooden doors closed with a slight creaking. There is no trace left of the warmth of the elderly woman. Only emptiness in a dusty room. Lynn sat on the floor, immersed in reflections. The feeling of disappointment was intertwined with relief because it was found innocent. Muriel brought me embroidery so that I could shorten time. How nice to spend the days away from Letty, she thought. A few days later, the older maid came to me. The girl remembered the bright light and words, You can go out. I was sure that the lady would punish me. However, when the necklace was found in her beds, she greeted me without a shadow of anxiety. Such thoughts were swollen in her head, Lynn announced the merchant. I found a necklace in the crack box. It would be worth putting it carefully. Despite the rough statements, the girl continued to comb long, dark hair of Millie. I didn't steal the necklace, Lynn emphasized. In response, she heard, Just thank you that I didn't tell my father, otherwise you would have been kicked out for a long time. I am not guilty, and it is very upset, the girl thought when Meledia coldly asked, What do I look? But my pride does not matter. I am just a maid who has nowhere to go. She remembered. She wondered as if she wore her thoughts. Will I be able to defend myself? Is it worth looking for what you can love and protect? You look just charming, one girl exclaimed enthusiastically, looking at the blonde. Lynn wove in braid and dressed in a dress. Muriel said, I wanted to show everyone your hair, and you hide it. Lynn noted, You tried so hard. Then the maid confessed, I had to stand on your side during the incident with the necklace. Sorry, Lynn replied. Muriel, I am grateful that you have always believed in me. She said, "Everyone knows that you are not capable of it. Don't forget to capture what I asked," she exclaimed. "Okay," said Lynn because it was her first weekend. Unlike the hotel, a generous salary is paid in the duchy. And even the weekend is here, she thought. She remembered that Muriel asked to buy a novel and sewing supplies, so she went to the city center to make purchases. She thought, "It is necessary to buy a gift for Martin until he went to the academy. Maybe he will remember me." Leaving the store, she heard again familiar, "Thank you. Hope to see you again." Thinking, she closed the door of the store. I had to buy a book for Muriel, not be tempted and take another one for myself, she thought. The blonde focused on her thoughts. Here, she did everything she wanted. Isn't it worth going back to the estate? She walked past her husband. However, suddenly the stranger stopped as if looking at the girl who was in front of him. The blonde has frozen in place. The man stopped, as if afraid to even move. His breath lingered, and only a barely noticeably open mouth testified to his effort to breathe. And here, the man put his hand on the girl's shoulder. She was immediately scared, opening her eyes wide. Her body responded to shudder. "Sorry, Lynn, are you?" awkwardly asked the man standing behind. The girl, embarrassed, turned, still difficult to breathe. "I knew it. I recognized you from my hair," a young man exclaimed with red hair. In response, the girl only sighed hard. "I'm Lynn, and who are you?" asked the girl. To this, the young man replied, "What?" "This is me, Minos." Surprisingly, Lynn frozen for a moment, and then he asked, "Remember? When did you grow up?" "You don't recognize you at all," said the girl. The guy, smiling, replied, "I have a lot of physical activity." Smiling, he confessed, "I was very worried when you learned that you had left the hotel. Rumors were rumored that you were sent to the duchy." She wondered, "Were you a pupil of the Bogretsky? Does this work need physical effort?" He replied, he was tired of that work and decided to leave. The guy suggested, "Why not go a snack?" Lynn responded, "Sounds." Later, the maids look out of the window, watching what is happening below. "What are you busy there?" Muriel asked. One of the maids, retreating from the crowd, exclaimed happily, "That's where you—" "Look, Lynn talks to some man," said the maid, to which Muriel asked in surprise. "Lynn talks to her husband? I can't believe my eyes," the other girl said, looking out the window. The blonde communicated with her longtime friend. "He is quite attractive and tall," one of the maids said, looking carefully at the young man. The guy smiled openly and joyfully. "Maybe it's her boyfriend?" One maid guessed, to which the other denied. "But she does not understand at all such relationships." "Who knows? Maybe she will once appear and announce that she is getting married. And then she will leave us forever." They whispered. A voice came behind Martin. The courier arrived. He is a noise, but it seems that lady's personal maid knows well. Martin opened his eyes wide, looking carefully at the guy below, and it seemed as if his gaze became glass. The girl shone with a bright, joyful smile, admiring a red-haired boy. Even the brunette couldn't help but notice it. He did not suspect that she was able to smile so sweetly, he thought. Then he added, "Today, cancel all the meetings related to the academy. I want to go hunting," Martin said, leaving her office. The servant asked in surprise, "I apologize?" "Right now?" The servant reminded, "My lord, in 2 days you go to the academy." To which Martin replied, "Let it be your fiction." And so before Brunetta's eyes appeared the massive stones that he threw in crystal pure water. The boy was sitting on a stump, and numerous amazing flowers and juicy berries were adorned around him. The brunette exhaled hard, looking into the distance. His insightful eyes gradually lost their radiant glare, became lifeless. I didn't see a line for a while, but I heard the servants about her gossip. Martin thought, remembering their conversations. Therefore, he decided to look for her where they met before. The boy was thinking, looking into different corners of the garden. The boy muttered, rose from the place. "So how did she spend time on dates?" "I lost so much time." The boy approached the boy and licked him gently. Martin said, "Sorry, I was not intended to tear my anger at you, Flower." Enchanted, Brunetta gently stroked the horse's nose, and the animal seems to be smoking. finally feeling true joy and pleasure. What happened to me? I have never worried about anyone before. Why is everything else now? He thought. Suddenly, the boy's gaze stopped at the bush of red berries that grew in front. His horse, meanwhile, left only a few steps. These berries are familiar to me, said Brunette, remembering the moment when the blonde shared that these fruits were her beloved. After a long conversation with her longtime friend, the girl hurried to go home. She was racing, almost breathless, immersed in her own thoughts. I lost time until I made up for heaven with Minos. But suddenly, a brunette appeared before her eyes. Martin suddenly jumped out of the bushes that Lynn scared. She put her hands in her mouth, opening her blue eyes wide. Then, scared the blonde. "Milord? The brunette is contaminated with green bush leaves." He cast a girlfriend an icy look, barely breathing. "What are you doing?" asked the maid, pressing her hands to her chest. The boy quickly came out of the bushes and hurried to the blonde. And suddenly the girl opened her eyes wide, seeing the boy stretching her gift wrapped in a white cloth. Expanding the gift, the girl saw familiar berries. The embarrassed blonde, as she was, asked Martin, "Is it really puri berries? Why do you give me them?" The blonde asked uncertainly. The brunette replied without unnecessary emotions. "You said they like you." Brunetta's gaze changed. He scolded, watching the girl's movements, and the question did not come out of his head. Why doesn't she smile as bright as a courier? The guy thought, looking intently into her blush. The guy felt a fool, thought out and quickly went to go, throwing only, "I'll go." The girl was anxious to stop him. Suddenly, a girl with blue eyes stretched a handkerchief with yellow embroidered flowers. Undoubtedly, this gesture symbolized a gift. The girl's light-haired girl whispered, "It's for you." The man froze in place, looking carefully at her and a symbolic gift, a handkerchief with embroidered blackberries. Blonde said, still looking at her new purchased thing. The brunette froze, unable to take the deep look of the blue eyes from the gift. His eyes were wide open and he remained stationary. The girl, slightly embarrassed, squeezed a handkerchief in her hands and added, "I know that you need to go to the academy soon." The wind developed blonde hair as she finally said, "I hope you will be healthy while there." The man pressed his handkerchief firmly to himself, gently holding it in his hands. At first he was silent, but later exhaled. "Thank you, Lynn." The boy said, "I have only berries. However, I roll the field flowers. Do you want?" Lynn replied, "I will be happy to accept." Soon the owner went to the academy. I feel the joy that she had the opportunity to give him a scarf, she reflected. There was a majestic green Duke carriage in front of the girl in which the young gentleman went on the road. The blonde leaned against the window, escorting Martin with the eyes of clear eyes. She has already had time to attach to him. The girl's eyes were filled with bitter tears when she saw how far from their home the carriage had already left. For young Mr. Martin to feel comfortable after returning home? The girl thought, going out into his room. The girl remembered how at least once a week she secretly cleaned in his room when there was a convenient moment. She constantly swept windows and wiped the dust from all around. The seasons passed. Time was rushing forward. The sixth spring without it came unnoticed. The girl wondered, reaching out. "Lynn, where are you?" A sharp voice of a stranger was heard. Meanwhile, the blonde has frozen in the middle of the road, stretching her hand. "And here you are," said the man as Lynn, when he thought, tried to remember. She was 19 years old and she looked just fine. The maid rushed to her with a shout. "We have little time." "We were told to gather all servants." Lynn asked, "What happened?" "Young Mr. Martin returned," said the maid, forcing the blonde to cut back from the surprise. "Well, don't stand still. Let's go." She exclaimed that Lynn nodded in her way, thinking. The lady did not mention anything about it. The servants whispered with each other. "Our gentleman has returned?" But he has not even sent news. It has passed 6 years. Here he is. "God, are you sure? Is that exactly he?" They talked to each other. The blonde tried to see him, looking from their backs. The servants lined up in the hall and greeted it. "The young Mr. Martin arrived," they exclaimed. Suddenly, the ringing steps of the heels were taken. The girl in a bright red dress came on the stage and enthusiastically exclaimed, "Oh, just—" Before them stood Milady, who said with a smile, "With a return, dear brother." It seemed to emit light. I hope the trip was without adventure, she said, radiating a warm smile to her husband. At the same time, she played her eyes playfully. They have not seen you for a long time, Martin said, which Elizabeth said, You look tired. I will now ask Lynn and Sasha to prepare a bath. Yes, my lady. The young girls answered, raising their heads proudly. Lynn, meanwhile, seemed a little excited, looking carefully at the situation. Something wrong. Ladies are not in the mood today. Today you should be careful, Lynn thought, looking at Elizabeth. The girl hurried to rise to the high floor, barely blushing from fatigue. She carefully kept the division of the dress. And then the girl again remembered the face of the young Duke Martin, who also grew up and changed significantly. The girl tried to restore her breathing again. Only one mention of him caused Lynn feel that someone was taking her breath. The young gentleman finally returned, she thought happily. However, she soon plunged into her daily responsibilities. Lynn, the water in the bath has already reached a comfortable temperature. It is no longer necessary to add hot, Sasha said. The blonde retreated back. Then the maid noted that the young Mr. Martin became even more attractive. She barely recognized her. Lynn, also smiling, confirmed, I am also. I wonder if he still remembers me. The girl wondered and then said, I will go still to bring towels. But when a tall figure of a man in unusual clothes appeared before her, the girl stopped instantly, closing her eyes. I apologize, no longer, said the girl with blonde curls, looking at the dissatisfied expression of a man with dark hair. He frowned, squeezing his jaws. You can go if the bath is ready, said the man, to which the maid quickly came out, answering, Of course, milady. What happened just? It's not the young gentleman I remember, the girl thought, casting her gaze again. Did he forget me? She thought sadly, and suddenly Sasha exclaimed, Lynn, why did you get there? Hurry. And why did I expect all this time? The girl thought when aristocrats were crossed around the building, hotly discussing the cards. Aristocrats were hotly discussing the news. Martin became a surprisingly beautiful man. And he is only 20. The best time for engagement. How is our pot au fait? The cook shouted suddenly, cooking the soup. He was noticeably nervous because the holiday was already on the approach. Send snacks, said the cook. In honor of the return of the Lord, his luminarity decided to arrange a reception in the estate. All maids were carefully preparing for a magnificent reception, making every effort in preparing a 3-day celebration. The first day of the gentlemen will be held on the shooting, and the ladies will enjoy a cup of tea. From the second day, all guests will gather together for celebration. The maids whispered, To prepare the techniques is a grueling business. She would feel on the verge of fainting if it had to be done again. Lynn, smiling, said consent. Her face illuminated a gentle smile when she thought, The estate is crowded with a variety of guests, and yet the attention of everyone focuses on one person. The blonde thought, noticing others, they are interested in watching someone special. A lot of time has passed. Do you remember me? Everyone wants to attract the attention of the Lord, competing in his view. Lynn plunged into reflections. How did you live in the academy? Asked the girl, to which the man with a smile replied, I learned a lot, ladies. The girl sadly lowered the blue eyes in the design. This young man certainly stands out among others. What an annoying picture is it? She thought the brunette, watching 2 girls seeking the attention of young Mr. Martin. Why do everyone pay attention to him, not me? Elizabeth thought. She then turned to Lynn. Can you bring me something? It became very hot. Yes, honored. I'm fast, said Lynn with perseverance. She was answered by a blonde lady with blue eyes, demonstrating a tricky smile in the anticipation of an interesting sight. And so, Elizabeth skillfully put the leg of the girl, despite the fact that she was in the shoes, doing so with perfect accuracy. After a few moments, the blonde unsuccessfully fell on one of the girls, which was absorbed by Martin's attention. I'm sorry, young lady, said Lynn. The girl replied, Why do I apologize? People in the crowd whispered, And you are aware how much did I put for this dress? The girl exclaimed as the aristocrats whispered. Her dresses came an end, they discussed. Elizabeth said, The maid spilled tea on the lady. I felt that this could happen. I warned you to be careful, Lynn fell to her knees, begging for forgiveness. I am extremely sorry, honorable lady. But Bedford exclaimed, I apologize to nothing. What happened, honorable lady? The other man asked, watching this rather loud scene in surprise. Have you been injured, Mrs. Bedford? Martin asked. She asked, Do you know my name? I'll never forget you. He replied. Lynn, can you get up? Asked one of the maids, helping the blonde to get up. The friend supported her, adding her help. Then Brunetta, with a bow, addressed the lady. Let me take on all the worries because our maid failed to fulfill his duties. The sister recently bought a wonderful dress. I think she will gladly show you. Isn't it, Ellie? He asked. You said that this dress is one in the whole empire. He said, and he picked up. Even the princess could not get it. Of course. The brunette agreed, squeezing the dress firmly. She thought, how much effort I had to make to get it. This is an extremely rare thing. I hope you like. Elizabeth said with a smile. Bedford said, Are you really sure of that? Martin approached the maid and began to give instructions until others brought tea and cool drinks. The blonde, stinging back, began to apologize again to the brunette that stood in front of her. Excuse me, young gentleman. Rest, Lynn. Elizabeth did not let you rest, Martin said, and the girl opened her eyes in surprise. The blonde lifted her astonished eyes to Martin, unable to believe that she heard. She looked thoughtfully at his icy, indifferent face. Young Master Martin. He doesn't believe that he remembers everything. Milord, said the girl with blue eyes, stuttering a little. And Muriel interrupted her. Let's hurry, Lynn. Thank you, milord. I will take care of her, the green girl said, grabbing the blonde quickly. Young milord turned to me by name. I am so happy. I thought the blonde, trying to hide my embarrassment at the same time. I really like it, Lady Bodford said. I am glad to hear that, Elizabeth replied. I will leave you so you can try on it. Then the blue-eyed girl closed the door and leaned her back, holding her breath for a moment. Then Elizabeth began to bite her lips nervously. The situation was clearly not liked. In her soul, anger was boiling and annoying. Curse! The girl exclaimed, after which she threw a small table that stood near the room. I spent so much time to get this dress. I planned to appear in it before Regina, she thought. Martin, you have not changed at all. Everything is the same fool, the girl thought, remembering his adult face. A 3-day party was a great success. The lady was silent after an unfortunate occasion with Lady Beeford. She silently watched the other girl danced in a dress she almost gained with great effort. Lynn remembered how she tried to take advantage of confusion to look again at the young lord. The young gentleman always surrounded himself with peers, reminded the blonde, watching his lively conversations. I completely forgot that he was such a busy man, the blonde thought, looking out from behind the wall. For a moment, her blue eyes looked into the distance, satisfied only with contemplation from afar. Of course, it would be better, she thought, realizing that it's time to get back to work. I haven't seen you for a long time. You are Ellie's personal maid, right? Philip asked with a slight smile. Yes, the girl replied briefly. Keep it, eat it, and recharge immediately, the blonde exclaimed, laying out a whole bunch of various treats in front of the girl. She smiled and said, Thank you. If you need something, let you know. Philip winked in response. Perhaps later. Then a girl with blue eyes turned her gaze on candy in her hands, thinking, It will definitely like Muriel. I hope today I will be able to get away from thoughts about the young gentleman. She thought the blonde, taking off his shape. Care, dare. Suddenly a man exclaimed. Slower, he added. The maids looked around in surprise. What do they do with the things of a young owner? Asked one of the maids in surprise. The other replied, Didn't you hear? Don't you know? Martin's manned moving to the guest house, whispered the girl in her girlfriend's ear. The maid was surprised. We have to share it immediately with others, she said. The party just ended and the owner immediately moved. The former Duchess spent her last days in this house. Why did he suddenly decide to move there? The blonde thought. I was pleased to watch the young gentleman from afar, thought the blue-eyed girl, looking closely at the guest house. Lynn, you heard? Rumors about Mr. Martin and his behavior are spreading in the city, Mariel said to the blonde. The girl dressed when she was asked, Lynn, you heard? Rumors about Mr. Martin and his actions are spreading in the city. What are the rumors? She asked the blonde suddenly, opening her bright eyes wide. Muriel thought for a moment. Green, Koza girl stated. Promise that you don't tell anyone. Lynn answered the question. Who could I tell? And Muriel began to mutter awkwardly from time to time, having eyebrows. Earlier, when she went to the kitchen, she told, I met Lore, who works in a guest house. She remembered with a smile as she looked out of the bushes. She noted that since then the owner arrived here, she fascinated as ladies entered the building. He has fun there all night. Ladies and gentlemen come together at night, creating a noisy atmosphere, and something is quite unusual, she said with surprise. Lynn hugged her knees and Muriel said, There is only one thing that men and women do at night together. Young Mr. Martin is not at all the boy I remember. I thought the blonde, remembering his smile. The blonde remembered how Brunette smiled after hunting, saying, You resemble a frightened rabbit. What happened during his stay at the academy? Elone wondered, remembering his indifferent and cold facial expression. Suddenly, the air was filled with a ringing sound of strokes of glasses, and a little wine accidentally poured out of them. And suddenly, someone's yellow shoe appeared on the table. Blondin was fascinated by the palm of his hand, struck by such courage. Smiling, the blonde solemnly said, Where there is booze and music, there are definitely dancing. And she started dancing. In the crowd, enthusiastic exclamations were heard. Does this dance popular with ordinary people? Impressive? Martin sat somewhere behind. Suddenly, a girl with bright red hair came to him and asked, Are you a master here? Why are you just sitting? A girl with yellow eyes stood in front of him. Martin responded, Wow, if not herself, Elena Schuffelheim. Without a ceremony, it is just Elena, as usual, she said, sitting on the back of the sofa. As you say, Helen, he replied. There was never anything sweet in you, the girl said suddenly, barely inflating her lips. She studied Martin carefully. Elena asked, We are friends. What do you hide from me? Martin replied, Nothing. But the girl denied, Don't deny. But she broke the voice of a man who came with a friend. They insisted, What are you doing here? Without you, not so much fun. I can't leave you for a moment. The girl answered in his voice. But the men suggested, Come on, you yourself. The man with dark hair looked in a glass of wine and saw his reflection there. He drew slightly and lingered in the design. That's the best I can do. This is the only way out, he convinced himself, reading a letter from his mother. She wrote that Elizabeth was born from another. I have to hide the terrible truth about my family. I don't care who it will be, but someone please save me, he thought. This is such stress. Why does Martin behave so strange? Elizabeth thought, looking at a variety of jewelry. The brunette whispered to her nose, While he is in a guest house, I almost unable to see Philip. Suddenly, curls appeared on the girl's head. She noted that she was a great opportunity to win her father's commitment. Lynn, please check out how Martin's things are in so I could tell my father, said the brunette. The maid clarified the question. Sometimes you really are so naive. No servant can do without acting on the nerves, so you can go when you finish, she said. Then the maid, a little embarrassed, squeezed her white apron nervously and began to slightly sort through her fingers behind her back. Yes, ladies, the girl responded. Soon it was a great construction of a guest house. The blonde looked from behind the tree, thinking, Here he, a guest house. I have never been here before. Muriel turned out to be right. Too many people gathered here. A minute, isn't it a young master? The girl thought thoughtfully. Is it worth Griev? Don't want to be a burden, the maid said until a stranger suddenly appeared behind. Who is this lady near? She added mentally. Hi, beauty, the man exclaimed, grabbing the blonde firmly by his hand. She tried to escape. The girl screamed so loud that her voice came to Martin and Helen, who turned in surprise in the direction of sound. What was it for a cry? Elena asked. The scene unfolded in front of them. The girl tried to repel Brunette. The man, ridiculed, repeatedly repeated, Stop resisting and take away the hat. He reached out to the white fabric on her head. "Please let me go," the girl begged. But suddenly the man fell frightened, seeing in front of him a firmly clenched fist. "Disappear from here," said Mr. Martin strictly, repelling her husband. His face flicked and his gaze became more difficult. "Okay, I'll be back inside." The stranger replied uncertainly, rubbing his neck. Martin remained standing next to Lynn. Then the girl lifted a restless look at Martin. Her cheeks were barely blushed and her breathing became uneven. Why did he decide to come to my rescue? She thought the blonde, looking carefully at the serious, piercing face of the blue-eyed brunette. However, the young gentleman cast an angry look at the blonde, lifting dark eyebrows up. "What are you doing here?" asked the man, to which Lynn replied, "Her Majesty wants to find out how you are doing there." And then the brunette, not turning her head to the blonde woman, suggested, "Let's go with me." The girl agreed without hesitation. I had not met her here before. Why does this girl remind me of Her Highness of Regina? Elena thought, staring at Lynn. "Go, you want to know if I have okay?" he said, spending the girl into the room. Lynn stayed at the door. The girl's cheeks were even more sparkled and her heart was pounding crazy. Her gaze was crystal clear and she sought to say something. However, she never dared to say a single word, only silently watched the brunette approaching a double bed. Suddenly, the young master approached Lynn, turning to her. The girl politely bowed and asked, "Yes, my lord?" She repeated, "Sorry, the lady ordered me to come here." And she thought, I probably upset him. "I'm sorry," the man said, reaching out to the girl. He was dressed in a light white shirt, and suddenly the blonde wide open her blue eyes with surprise. She frozen in place without deciding to say at least a word. And then a man with blue eyes gently touched her lip, and when he broke away, he said, "Go. Pass on the news to your mistress." Later, after a few moments, the man whispered softly to the blonde, "And do not forget to tell her in detail how I have things." "You scattered," the man said, barely holding back a smile. The girl could not even move from surprise. "You blush," Brunei said, touching the girl's lips again. She really felt a strong embarrassment after a kiss. "I thought you would run away," the man said, gently sorting her blonde hair. The girl only covered her eyes a little. "Then I have not yet realized this. But now I understand. If I do not go now, there will be no gate," the blonde thought. She remembered how she heard from the maids about the outrage that happened at night between a man and a woman. "We won't dwell on a kiss. Are you sure you are ready for it?" the man asked, slowly removing the apron. The girl pressed her hand against her chest and thought for a moment. She was aware that she had no right to do it with the young master. She watched him, plunging into reflections. After all, his fate is to become the next Duke of Ariup, and mine, to remain a maid forever. And then the blonde remembered how upset when she saw the young owner 6 years later. She frowned her eyebrows. Before her eyes, a tall, slender brunette was set, behind which the maids were, covered by the desire to please their owner. The girl also mentioned the days when, as a child, the young master Martin was always near her. She remembered how a frightened look over her shoulder on a boy with her eyes wide open. At that moment, the brunette just smiled slightly, looking at the blue-eyed blonde in front of him. The wind played his hair playfully, and then the girl remembered how she finally decided to give a small presentation, blue-eyed brunette. "It's you," she said, stretching a small handkerchief with a floral motif. Lynn thought, I always admired him from afar. Maybe it's my only chance. Apparently, it is time to listen to the heart and at least once to act at his command. She reflected. I will be able to spend that night in the arms of a man I really like, she thought when Martin took her hat. I want to stay, the girl said suddenly, smoking even more. She thought, I want to listen to my instincts. The man opened his eyes in surprise without waiting for such a bold step from the girl. He froze in place. Then the man smiled treacherously, admiring a charming and embarrassed girl with snow. Then the blue-eyed brunette carefully put the girl on the bed. She breathed hard, watching Martin's movements. Subsequently, the man began to kiss the girl gently in his neck from time to time, biting. The blonde was surprised and opened her eyes wide. Then she covered her eyes, asking, Why are you biting me there? The girl thought, I feel so strange, Suddenly, tears made them from the bright eyes of the blonde. She began to wipe them, trying to hide her embarrassment. The man noticed it and asked in surprise, "Why are you hiding your face?" Lynn was even more soaked. And then Lynn said, "I have never done so before." The man was impressed, wide open. "Is it really for the first time?" said the man, remembering the red guy with whom she talked so vividly. "Apparently that guy is not important at all," suddenly said Brunette, a little detaching from the girl. Lynn asked. The girl was surprised for a moment and then plunged into reflection. She did not even suspect that the young master had such a muscular physique. The man swelled his eyes and scolded. The blonde wondered, will he use it to conquer me with his will? The next day, the bright sun flooded both castles with its light. Everything around seemed to play with colors, reflecting the rays of the heavenly light. Lynn turned to the blonde Muriel, looking at her with notes of compassion. The girl is frozen, unable to move. "Did you get sick?" asked the girl, and the blue-eyed blonde, without breaking away from her affairs, asked confusedly. "You look pale," the maid said. Lynn asked to return. "I woke up early in the morning. Maybe that's why," she replied. She hugged her, saying, "Did you go neither the world nor the star for me?" She was answered to her, "That's the least I can do for you." Lowering her eyes in the plan, the blonde plunged into her thoughts. "It is good that Muriel did not pay attention to my absence. I couldn't get rid of thoughts about last night, but I am sure that these memories will quickly disappear, like a summer sleep." Lynn was conscious one night. But that is enough, the girl thought, getting out of the owner's bed. Martin was still asleep. The blonde Gullibook decided to erase the event from memory and continue to live as if nothing had happened. And then the sounds came as a maid and gardener carefully looked after the garden. Someone cut the rosebuds. "How does my dear brother do?" Elizabeth asked with interest, drinking tea during breakfast while Lynn stood next to her. The brunette firmly kept a red rose that had just blossomed, clenching her teeth. Lynn replied, "It seems to have all well." And then the red petals picked up the wind. They were circling in the air, giving the neighborhood of the magical garden of incredible beauty. The blonde watched the red petals with surprise. Her bright eyes were widely revealed, grasping this sight. On the hands of the brunette there was blood from the thorns, but later she said, squeezing her teeth, "This is enough, you can go." The blonde approached Elizabeth and exclamedly exclaimed, "You have a bleeding hand, ladies. You need to treat the wound immediately." However, a dark-haired girl with blue eyes did not even want to hear about it. She kept anger, biting her lips and her jaw tensed in determination. Eli instantly got up, clenched his fists, and shouted, "Didn't you hear me? I told me to disappear." Lynn fell. "Go to wash my underwear." The brunette exploded, but the girl kept cold peace, remaining indifferent to this emotional disturbance. I wonder how the lady reacted to such news, the girl thought, remembering her long wavy hair. Why was she annoyed with the news that her brother has everything perfectly? The girl plunged into reflections while washing the floor. Her gaze became difficult and foggy. What made you become more evil than before? Lynn thought, remembering Ellie suddenly exclaimed, "Do you call cleaning? Start first." She exclaimed the brunette, spreading the blonde with dirty water. But only for a moment, she thought, and then realized everything was well. The more pain they brought these memories, the easier it was to forget that night, she thought. However, when she reached out, she suddenly thought, where am I being now? My body seemed to swept aflame. Again, this thought broke out in Blonde's when she tried to close her body with her hands. Her eyes remained closed. This feeling seems familiar, but I cannot remember what it means. The girl thoughtfully thought until she suddenly opened her bright blue eyes. But in a few moments, the girl got up and began to look at the terrain. A mysterious figure appeared behind her back. "My lord?" the girl exclaimed, rotating quickly. Her face was blossomed again, and she covered her mouth with her hand. Tears sparkled in the eyes. But the man suddenly interrupted her, kissing. The blonde, closing her eyes, reached out to his face uncertainly. Unexpectedly, the man kissed the girl gently in her neck, smiling playfully. Lynn, with a desperate exclamation, addressed, "You can't do so, my lord. Lynn, let's be honest with each other. I am sure you don't want to forget that night," said Brunet, gently drawing it to yourself. But suddenly the girl opened her eyes sharply and shouted. It instantly removed from an unknown object. Lynn jumped out of bed, and her hair, as if in a gust, rose with her. Hardly holding back the cry, she was breathing hard. Muriel slept firmly, without responding to the roar sounds. The blonde, while holding back the surprise, attached her palm to her mouth. She approached the neighbor, leaned, and thought, "It is good that Muriel sleeps so firmly." Then she looked at her chest. The heart was beating so fast that it seemed about a jumper, and the cheeks were lit by a bright red tinge. "I think the walk will help me calm down," the girl thought, going outside in the green garden with the fountain. Then the girl lifted her eyes to the night sky. The stars sparkled brightly, as if pointing the way to the satellites. Then the girl wrapped in a small plate and thought. The sky glowed with many stars. Their beauty fascinated her, but suddenly the memories of Lynn were missed in the head of Lynn. She squeezed the dress firmly, trying to drive these thoughts. "I thought that I could forget quickly," the girl thought. Suddenly, a male figure appeared behind her back. "That night doesn't go out of my head. Why is it going with me?" the girl thought when someone suddenly spoke her. "My lord?" The girl turned in surprise, looking back at Brunetta behind. The young master scolded again, looking intently at her. "I was sure that I would find you here," said Brunet, approaching Lynn. She asked, "What brought you here?" However, the man interrupted her by pressing the body of the blonde to a nearby tree. She shuddered and bounced back. The man asked, "How did you decide to go without saying anything after the night moaning in my arms?" "Sorry, my lord, but I'm just a maid. I have to go back to my duties," Lynn said, turning away. However, Brunetta sharply lifted the girl's chin, forcing her to look in his eyes. The blonde has frozen in surprise. Looking at the girl in front of him, the man remembered the content of the letter again. "My beloved son Martin," it was read. "When you read it, you will finish your studies at the academy. I would like to know how to report it. You should promise no one to tell your sister." "Although I feel that my father has already guessed," she said. "You and Elizabeth are my favorite children, but she is not your father's daughter. I am sure you already guess what I try to hint. You have to make sure that Elizabeth will remain in the heir up until the end of your days." "To protect her sister," Mom said. After reading the contents of the letter to the end, the man could not hold back anger and tore it into pieces. He fell to his knees, not knowing what the future was waiting for him. Realizing the situation, he understood that if his father learns, he would certainly do everything to get him away from her. Martin lifted his gaze to the sky, thinking, "It would happen before I become a Duke of Araput." The guy understood. As soon as the rumors begin to spread, the tongues will not silence. Then he addressed Lynn. "Come to me every night." Then Brunet, looking carefully at her discord, added, "Come to me until you get bored." The maids were handed over to each other by an old novel hidden in a blue cover. The girl remembered this book from her past. In this story, the maid fell in love with the ears of her young owner. Recalled the story of that book, Lynn. Their provisions were as different as day and night. They loved each other, realizing that it would not bear any fruit. She was thinking about it. The end was predictable. The girl reflected, imagining the scene from that book. The maid screamed, barely running out. The old man hit the maid, shouting, "How did you dare, a pathetic servant, to seduce my son?" The girl fell. Then the maid lifted her eyes on the elderly woman. The older woman exclaimed again, "You answer it," everyone whispered. But one man stood away, as if he had forgotten about the world. He was silent, as if he were petrified, watching the events. "What are you standing here? Have you not heard me?" said Lady, and the gentleman wept upset. The heroine was thrown into a cold and orphan prison, where the rudiments of her life crashed into small debris. The story ended tragically. They lost a flower that has not even blossomed, only felt the warm rays of the sun. For some reason, this story is commemorating in memory now? The girl thought, casting a wary look at Martin. Apparently, she felt her future in his image. The girl was numb on the spot, delving into thought. "This is not a request," he added, and Lynn thought. "It has nothing left about the boy he was before." Although he continues to talk to her friendly, there is a cold in his voice. The girl looked thoughtfully at him. Then the girl turned her gaze on the delicate flowers that just blossomed and asked the question, "But, my lord, why am I?" After a few seconds of silence, the man finally said, "Because you interested me." Lynn couldn't believe it, but then the girl thought, remembering the other ladies. Can it mean that he shows a romantic interest in me? You see a new entertainment in me? Finally added a guy with blue eyes and dark hair. The girl felt disappointment. And here Lynn thought, what did I hope at all? He never felt love to me. He sees in me not a woman who can be loved, but only a toy to meet his desires. That's all he needed. Lynn realized this. Lynn replied, You asked me to come to the guest house every night. But they may notice me because I divide a room with a maid. The man did not find the words and only lowered his view of blue eyes down. He clenched his lips more tightly, looking closely at the girl. Is this the only thing that excites you? The man asked unexpectedly. The girl asked in surprise, I apologize. I only need to resolve this question. I will take care of it for you, Brunette said, turning away from Lynn. But suddenly the man turned. He raised his eyebrows and strictly told the girl, Don't forget. You have to come to me every night. The girl was silent, only a sad smile appeared on her lips. She escorted the owner with the look of her bright blue eyes. The girl looked at the majestic, shining with bright light moon that illuminated the night trails of the garden. After some time, one of the maids tiredly tied her light braids and said, Finally, the day came to an end. The maids were talking lively with each other, saying, I urgently need a bath. And me too. I just can't wait for the next weekend. Lynn quickly dropped his hat and continued to talk behind. I will go to bed right away. Someone wants a cake? I'm pretty in a slice. She thought with relief that everything went smoothly and said, You made a lot of effort, Muriel. Muriel replied, It was more difficult. Lynn wondered, how to get into a guest house this night. Seeing Muriel, she suggested, Maybe we will go to eat something. But suddenly the main maid approached them. That's where you, Lynn, she said. Lynn asked, What happened? After a short pause, the woman finally said, Collect her things. Her face remained mysterious, without any emotion. She replied, I was ordered to send you to the guest house. Muriel will stay here and Lynn will receive a separate room. But here the blonde grabbed the woman by her hand and asked, Could you explain why such a decision was made? Then the maid whispered in her ear, This is Mr. Martin's order. Hearing this, the girl was so frightened that she frozen in place, as if dug. Then the old woman added, I do not know why he did so. He knows that you serve Millie. And here the maid again said, But perhaps it is not a secret for you. The girl, frightened, clenched her lips nervously. The old woman asked, You don't know anything about what's going on, Lynn? The blonde wandered the chin nervously. Lynn understood that the situation would be complicated if rumors of a biased attitude to her. There were whispers behind. People were talking. Is this really a young master? Is it possible? She always believed that this woman was calm, maybe wrong. The lady constantly reproached her. She plunged into reflections. Will I ever get back to my room? If I could be frank. But Muriel only looked away. But now the only thing I want is to escape from here. The girl plunged into her thoughts, feeling different views. And again, before the eyes of the young blonde appeared a huge building of a guest house, flooded with a moonlight. And after a while, the girl was again in front of the door of the young Mr. Martin's room. She knocked. However, she stopped halfway when her hand froze. Squeezing his fist stronger, the girl hesitated without dared to knock on the massive door for the second time. The girl was aware that she simply did not have another way out, lowering her now the darkened look of blue eyes. The girl mentally remembered, I know that I will just cross the threshold. Everything will happen again like last night. The young gentleman will capture me again with his power. The girl reflected, remembering every touch of her husband. I feel strange when I think about it, the girl thought, barely touching his forehead palm. A deep exhalation escaped, but suddenly the blonde opened her sky-blue eyes wide and lowered her hand from his forehead, as if something suddenly scared her. The door was open, and a tall brunette appeared in front of the blonde, who, a little bit of her eyes, stood over her. However, in just a moment, the brunette smiled gently. His gaze immediately became warmer when he looked at her. I was already going to go for your search, Lynn, said the man, focusing on his gaze on a confused blueberry blonde. The human mind is a truly interesting thing, the girl was thinking when the man approached and took her hand. Then the man gently kissed the blonde in his shoulder. She thought, this man plunged into a vulnerable position, and this is none other than a young gentleman Martin. The girl was thinking, without end returning to him. The young gentleman looked carefully in the face of the blonde, slightly moving the dark eyebrows. His face was barely bad. His love is like a sweet poison that I cannot give up, Lynn thought, suddenly shouting. One of the maids said that Lynn was sent to the guest house where the young owner lives. She now lives there. Rumors are spreading in the servant instantly. The lady, she said, looking closely at the magic Elizabeth. She rubbed her chin and asked, "Did you say that my brother ordered to place my personal maid in her beds?" The next morning, the sun was slowly rising to the zenith, illuminating the darkest corners, and the windows reflected its glow. The blonde embraced the bed, hiding under the blanket, not wanting to wake up. There was a heavy, stagnant smell in the room. Finally, a few seconds, the girl dared to open her blue eyes. Her hair was gently falling on her face. Finally, the girl got out of bed and has already started looking around the room around. Her white hair fell slightly behind her back. After a heavy exhalation, the maid barely said, "How tired I was." Her eyes lost her glitter again, becoming gloomy and burdened. She thought, "It has been 3 weeks from the fatal night when the lady ordered her to go to the hospitable house." She sat on the bed and thought, how she would like to seek help before you go to the hospitable house again. The girl rubbed her lips, plunging into thoughts. But I could not predict how the young master would react. It caused me anxiety. It may have been agreed by both parties, but it all looked not optimistic to me. The girl clear. If I tell the truth, people may think that I had selfish motives. Lynn thought, putting her shape before work. Someone could have thought that I had made every effort to seduce the young owner. She turned away from the door, fully gathering with thoughts. The girl looked in the mirror, but her face remained almost impartial. No emotion or feeling. The young gentleman gave me the love and care that I dreamed of. But why does it seem like a void in my soul? She thought. Apparently it is difficult for me to put up with that cruel and cold truth that I am just a toy for his aspirations. Lynn thought. After that, the blonde left the room, plunging into reflections. How is the maid dream of a young owner? His luminosity and young master mercy on us, leaving us such delicious food. The choir said the maid. The maids whispered, "Today we will have a creamy pie. The owners always leave some meat." Lynn, however, sat aside. "Leave me a little because last time I got nothing." And I also added in this second voice. "Do you really decide on it?" They were talking, and at once all 3 girls turned their gaze on a blonde that relaxed food alone, closing their eyes. But suddenly a whole glass of water was poured into the blonde. Lynn did not have time to react, only surprised her head. "Sorry, it was accidental," said the girl with long hair, who used to help Elizabeth. Her filling laughter accompanied an apology. "Oh, I didn't notice you," the girl said, and other maids joined her. "Yes, we thought you were in a guest house." The maid laid her hand on the cheek of Lynn, saying, "Are you the same girl who won the owner's heart and seemed to know how to use her gorgeous hair in her favor?" "Let me go, it hurts," said the girl, but the stranger denied. "Why do I have to do it? Do you think I will hurt you?" The maid confessed, "To be frank, I do not tolerate such as you. Those who think that beauty gives them the right to everything." The blonde looked sadly at the girl and barely audibly said, "No." However, a cry suddenly sounded. "What are you doing?" The main maid broke into the hall with the words, "Bullying among the staff is unacceptable." Finally, when the maid retreated, she said, "I would never call it a mockery. My actions are quite justified. Other maids constantly prevented me from living, and Muriel avoided me. I realized why she was doing so," Lynn thought. When the bullying became unbearable, the girl's thoughts went into a dead end. She felt as if something the invisible was riding her to squeeze her more and more. She understood that it was unacceptable, but still felt as much as she relied on the young owner. What will happen to me when Milady knows about it? The girl thought, imagining a harsh brunette. However, without a doubt, this will not be limited only by my release. I have no right to be exposed, she thought, feeling her heart accelerates the rhythm of anxious thoughts. And suddenly, in a completely different place, before the eyes of a stranger, there were a large, lush blooming roses. "Young master." "So you can't," they exclaimed, turning to the little boy. It was Martin, a 10-year-old brawler. "The young sir, where did you go?" shouting people around. Meanwhile, the boy could not look away from luxurious roses. Mr. Martin, Mr. Martin. The exclamations from the crowd came. However, the boy, as if not hearing them, continued to look at the gorgeous roses, extending his hands. And here the boy was barely audibly sighed, wrinkled with slight pain. His gaze immediately became blurred. "It hurts," said the little brunette. But suddenly behind his back, a mysterious figure appeared in a long snow-white dress. "Lord Martin? Finally, here's where you are. All are already completely exhausted with the search. Why not return?" She asked the blonde. The boy agreed. "Yes, Your Majesty." But then the woman, taking his hand, exclaimed, "Wait, you have a wound. Probably through the spikes on pink bushes," said the queen with a gentle smile, stretching Martin's nose. "Always be careful," said the queen with white hair, and the boy listened to her as if fascinated. "The heart breaks in pain when I see your wounds. Please remember it." Again and again the woman. And suddenly, unexpectedly, Brunet opened blue eyes. He was still lying in his bed, squeezing jaws firmly. After a few seconds, the man finally muttered, "It was a dream." He was dorming. Then the man reached out, which he cut that day, and said, "Her Majesty did not dream for me for a long time, since its Majesty has not become, several years have passed. Soon the throne will take Regina." He reflected. He lacked those warm embrace which she enveloped him every time he came to the palace. He thought, Arpe was always the only one who treated me with kindness after his mother's loss. He was aware of. Is it possible that this reason prompted me to look for Lin? The young man thought, sitting on the edge of the blue bed, but suddenly a loud knock on the door. The man turned instantly, slightly frozen, his blue eyes. After creaking, the door opened and the man said feverishly, "I told you that it is not worth knocking," the man said, looking at the pale face of Lin. She squeezed a light cape that fell from her shoulders. The gloomy brunette asked with interest, "Why is you always looking like you're about to pay?" Instead of answering, Lin rushed to him. The girl rushed to Brunetta sharply and hugged him firmly, locked her breath. He froze, quite surprised by the unexpected manifestation of feelings. Brunette was surprised to look at the blonde, opening his eyes wide that seemed to glow in night darkness. Pressing closer to her husband, the girl finally dared to speak. "Military, I ask you, give me your love." The man glanced at the girl with surprise. He was a little confused. He finally turned to her. "Lin," Martin said, she thought, leaning her head. "Today I met me cruelty. I feel complete moral and physical exhaustion." The door began to close. The blonde plunged into reflections. "You have embarrassed me into this story, but now it doesn't matter. All is well while I am in your arms." The girl flashed, not even knowing that they are already watching them. The girl who recently spilled the drink on Lin looked out of the horn, smiling approvingly. The rumors were not deceived, she thought. "You need to report to Milady." The maid was immediately decided. The next day, the burning sun again shone everything around. Some man on the street was vigorously waving fish, shouting loudly. It was a crowded street where merchants habitually offered their goods. Other residents also actively looked at the buyers. Fruits, just torn from trees, or fresh meat, the best in the city. The girl, hiding her hair under his hat, left the store and listened to talk behind. "What do you want to do? Let's play. Welcome, Lin." Woman greeted the blonde woman, to which the girl replied, "Hello, Miss Lila." "Would you like to try a new dessert?" asked the lady. "With great pleasure," the maid with blue eyes replied. "I spend most of the unbearable nights with the owner, and through the maid I have to be twisted," she said. But suddenly someone started to wave vigorously with his hand. "Lin!" "Here." The girl was surprised and froze for a moment. "Oh, it's Minos," said Lin happily when she noticed a familiar red boy with a warm smile on her face. The girl sat down at the table and said, "Sorry that she made you wait." Minos, smiling, replied, "Don't worry, I just came. With Minos, I feel calm," she thought, listening to his voice. "I ordered a lot of everything I think you like," he assured. "Issue goes to the sea and returns only once or two a year." She kept her thoughts, continuing to chat. "I am so glad you are here again. It's for you." exclaimed the red-haired guy, and without waiting for the answer, threw a whole handful of multicolored candy. I work a little on land, the Minos said, shining with a bright smile. Meet the next time for a snack? You look pale than usual, the man said, pouring tea. Lynn replied in surprise. Really? I didn't even know. Someone hurts you to live? Asked the man, leaning closer to the girl. Lynn overwhelmed. The girl turned away, began to play nervously with the collar of her outfit, then said, It's not. The guy exclaimed, I understood. Is this because of some guy? The man asked, while she thoughtfully lifted the cup to her lips. It became clear to me how insightful Minos is. The man warned, Be careful. All men are animals. Do not fall in love with anyone who confesses to their feelings. You know, the red man was about to add something else, but suddenly stopped, wide open. You've eaten 3 cakes, it never happened, he said. To which Lynn immediately replied, I have a great appetite lately. He said to eat more means health. She thought, how wonderful it is to have a person with such a friendly attitude. The guy exclaimed again, Let him know if someone hurts you. I will intercede immediately. The girl laughed in reply. Thank you, Lynn thought. She realized that many years have passed since someone really worried her fate. This caused sadness. Suddenly, shots aimed at an unknown target that stood in heaven. However, the brunette did not stop. He began to hit other targets that stood on a small table. Aristocrats were observed next to him. Hearing the praise, the young man is markedly straightened, triumph. It was incredibly, my lord. You have never been banged. Your shooting skills are incredible. The men responded enthusiastically, watching Martin confidently recharged his gun. Then the blue-eyed brunette again took the goals under the sight. He clasped one eye. He liked to shoot, but suddenly he remembered their conversation with the girl. Then the brunette asked, scratching his head, Who offended you? Then Brunette paid attention to the bruise on the girl's clavicles. I didn't leave these traces, he said. Lynn got out of bed and, squeezing a little, replied, It's a little thing. She just got scratches while working. She carefully hid the bruising. The man shot and missed the target. He was very close to hit, but the bullet never got into a green bottle. The people behind the back and whispered, Did you see it? Incredible. Could the young gentleman miss? Blue-eyed brunette froze in real estate, and then the man slowly lowered the gun, listening to the quiet whisper of the aristocrats behind his back. His body tensed. Was it Elizabeth? No, it seems she became calmer over the years, reaching the age of majority. The man thought, perhaps these are other maids? I heard how they discussed Lynn. The man thoughtfully remembered their conversations. Why doesn't she tell me anything? Doesn't trust me? The man thoughtfully, watching the aristocrats from the side. Then the blue-eyed brunette took a glass of water, but suddenly his attention was distracted by something in a distance. This is Lynn. The man understood, watching the girl at the gate. She stood next to some red-haired man. The blonde glowed with a bright laughter, barely managed to cover her smile with her palm while talking to him. What does she do? Why does this scoundrel smile so much? And I never give me my smile, the man thought, squeezing a glass. Thinking about it, he remembered a welcoming party and the voices of young girls. How did your date go? One of the questions was heard. Perfectly. He took care of the gift and my favorite desserts, the girl said, smiling gently and closing her eyes. How I envy you, the other girl exclaimed. He's really a prominent gentleman, Milady added with her charming smile. Martin listened carefully. Late at night, the girl dared to knock on the door leading to the room of the blue-eyed brunette, who was already familiar, but she has not yet had to touch the door as they suddenly opened. The man said sharply, Come in. For a moment, the blonde stopped at the door. Her gaze seemed to go out. Slightly tilting her head, she firmly entered the room. The girl began to undress without hesitation, slowly pulling her nightshirt. Her face remained indifferent, but the man suddenly intercepted her hand, squeezing his wrist firmly. He finally said, Not today. What? I don't understand, said the girl, staring at his face. The man slowly stepped back and approached the table. Brunetta slowly lifted the lid from the tray without saying a word on a blonde. And so many different dishes appeared on the table. Juicy meat with vegetables, appetizing rolls and paws, generously seasoned with juicy tomatoes. The girl looked at them in surprise, widely revealing her blue eyes. Mixing surprise and curiosity, she asked, "What is it?" Then the man pushed the chair, covering the small windows, and seemed to be bowing his head, as if making a nod. "Sit down, let's lunch together," offered a young man with blue eyes, looking closely at the girl in front of him. The girl gently crushed food with a knife into small pieces. All the dishes on the table were impressed with their exquisite preparation, as if they were created by real masters of cooking. A tense atmosphere hung between people. The girl sat still, and Martin covered her eyes. Brunette bitten a piece of meat again, enjoying his taste. His ability to appreciate food was impressive, and disobedient hair gave him even more charm, the girl thought. To sit at one table with a young owner was much strange than just being in bed. "Why don't you eat? It's hard to cut," asked the man, and the girl lifted his sad look, clamping her lips. "No, I just don't want to eat," said quietly, looking at a table where the varied exotic dishes competed for attention. "Where did you go today?" asked Brunet. The girl asked, and he continued. "Who met with?" "What did she do?" Lynn replied that she met with a friend at lunch. Martin said, "So it is clear why you are not hungry. But try to eat at least a little. Such dishes in local restaurants do not find," said Brunet, imagining her smile. Indeed, will it make her smile? The girl lowered her eyes and, with a voice hesitation, said, "My lord, if you don't want to see me today, can I go back to myself?" A man who has almost lifted a fork with the girl's mouth suddenly stood as if he were fascinated without deciding to take a step. Suddenly, everything broke up before his eyes, and for a man with blue eyes, the world around became fuzzy. The girl lifted her head, looking at him in surprise. Her blue eyes only opened a little. The dark-haired guy suddenly changed his decision. He put his hand on his belt. His figure stood over the blonde standing in front of him. "Get undressed," said Brunet, casting a cold look at the girl standing in front of him. His gaze became irreconcilably rigid. "And go to my bed," the man said. Soon, an assortment of clothing gathered on the floor. The girl slept firmly, hiding her magical eyes. Her hair was scattered on a white face, creating a delicate halo. Apparently, she was so tired that she fell asleep instantly. "It resembles the day of our first meeting," he thought, plunging into memories. "Dad, I need a personal maid," said a little girl with dark hair, approaching that day an adult man. Both men cast a strict look at his blue eyes on a young girl, while the boy looked at her rather with fatigue. Elizabeth said it as if she asked for the help of an innocent doll. Marvin remembered it when she said, "I will ask Marvin for care." She needed a young maid. Brunet remembered how his younger sister asked. Then she replied, "Thank you." After that, Marvin approached Elizabeth and asked, "You already have enough helpers." "Why another maid?" Despite the angelic appearance, she said, "A girl that will be punished for me." The brunette said, "Recently the governess of the man does not give me rest, but I can't put up with beatings." Elizabeth was cruel and selfish, but soon something unexpected happened in the garden, which made the man remember certain points. "Here is Elizabeth," the man said. Martin looked away and continued to drink tea from a small cup. "And here our estate-arrived Lynn." Martin remembered the moment when Elizabeth first saw her behind her back. A new maid appeared on the horizon. She was miniature and fragile, Martin thought, and suddenly remembered how his appeal was reflected in the air. "Young Mr. Martin." Chaos prevailed. People ran and shouted, looking in search. "Where are you, young lord?" But the man, trying to avoid this noise, hid on a tree. He covered his eyes as if he were going to dodge, but he thought instead, "Why not stop vomiting finally? Sometimes I just need to be alone." The young boy thought that day, looking closely at his elongated palm, but suddenly he heard a stranger snoring. The boy lowered his gaze and noticed a maid under the tree. The blue-eyed brunette instantly jumped out of the tree, thinking deeply, "Is she not evading work?" The girl slept, hugging her knees, but here the young man suddenly opened his blue eyes wide. It seemed as if they were lit at that moment. He noticed how wavy silver strands of hair were visible from the girl's hat, but her eyes remained covered. The man watched her as if fascinated. He did not even dare to look away, only raised his eyebrows in surprise. I see tears slowly flow through her long eyelashes. The man stared at her face at close range. She was incredibly pretty. Her hair shone in the sun like silver. The maid with hair of great color, he thought, and the man froze in the step of the sleeping girl. Now he realized everything. At that moment, I was extremely interesting. Who are you? It's a place where no one knows, said Brunet, thinking. He was interested in, are Her Majesty's hair look like her hair? He was never interested in anyone before, the guy thought, looking carefully at the room. However, the brunette could not look away from the girl, smiling gently. He said that other servicemen never worried me. The man gently stroked the girl on the cheek, continuing to think. Something in Lynn awakens my curiosity. I seek to keep it forever in my arms. I want my hands to never leave her. The man thought, imagining that moment, like a child who dreams of an unusual toy. A man with dark hair thought, approaching the girl closer. Gently touching her lips, he gave her a soft kiss. It may have been a sense of property. The man thought, then lay next to the girl, hoping to fall asleep. The man thought, there is no doubt that it will disappear once. The next day, Lynn addressed, take it with you. The girl with silver hair firmly clung to the pen of the basket. Breathing hard, began to lift it. Finally, a peaceful day. The blonde thought, carrying a heavy basket and stepping into the room. By the way, the lady has not been calling me lately. The blondes flashed when she passed near another maid. However, suddenly another girl pushed her into her shoulder. Blue-eyed blonde did not expect such a surprise. And suddenly the girl was on the floor when she slipped out of her hands with heavy apples. Above her was a maid, emphasizing her advantage in this unexpected situation. Look where you are going, sarcastically said the bold maid, looking at the puzzled face of the blonde woman who was confused among the scattered apples. This is the same fool that everyone is talking about. No other than tired after their night adventures, she said. I am sure that it is it that dissolves these rumors. Recently, Marie was lifted by the service thanks to his affection from the lady. She reflected. It seems to me that she spreads gossip. Perhaps Marie has been raised by the service thanks to his affection from the lady? She thought. After that, the blonde just began to put the apples in the basket, breathing hard. She said, I'm extremely busy now. All the same, being away from the merciful, I feel much more free. The blonde thought, putting all the apples to the basket. However, in a few seconds, the face of Muriel appeared in front of her. Green-eyed girl turned to Lynn. Probably you can't tell me everything now. Sorry that I did not stand up for your defense at this moment, the maid said, but immediately added, no, I'm always on your side. Lynn thought, how can Muriel believe me so in this situation? Her words caused warm joy in my heart. Suddenly, the maid was called, Muriel, hurry! And the girl went quickly, leaving the blonde again alone. The girl, after finishing the windows of the building, began to hope that the situation would somehow work. But suddenly the voices of the maid were heard. We were ordered to gather in the garden for home because Mildy wants to see us. Of course. The girl thought when she heard the votes of the maid behind her back. She imagined a whip. In her imagination, the insulting of Milmed with long, gorgeous hair, which held a whip in her hands, appeared. The girl returned, piercing Din with a harsh look. She realized that the world had other ideas about me. The whole yard was filled with whispering maids who went outside and were looked at with interest, asking each other the same question. What's going on? They could not resist the conversations by asking each other, why did Milady gathered us here? Everyone felt not in their plate. However, the merciful suddenly waved the whip and exclaimed, silence. The frightened maids did not dare to contradict her. I'm up to date. And about those dancing rumors that spread the estate. A smart maid, they say? Someone is as cheeky as she is, probably? She said. She dared to seduce my brother Martin, the girl exclaimed. The blonde, covered by fear, only covered her mouth with her hand. Then the brunette with blue eyes again waved the whip, as if calling someone to come closer. Lynn, go forward. Milady addressed to a frightened girl who had already crossed her hands in prayer. The blonde, shaking with fear, stood in front of Milady, bowing her head. Elizabeth focused on her a strict look, she thought. Finally, the rumors have reached Milady's ears. Then the brunette strictly ordered, "Lynn, say." Elizabeth smiled, noting, "Your boldness has no limits." How a small maid dared to fascinate the air? She emphasized, "I can be merciful, but it is impossible to forgive." "Now tell the truth. Admit that you have looked at my brother," the girl exclaimed, and from her words, other maids were noticeably scared. "Lady Elizabeth, what's going on here?" The senior maid intervened in their conversation, appearing the last in the garden. The older maid Ruth looked tired, breathing hard. The lady added, "No one expected that the main maid of Ruth would come." And then the older woman, approaching closer, added, "You are our mistress, milady, but servants have to work." Ruth reminded that collecting them without a joint council with the family could harm the estate. Ellie, when he heard it, cast a harsh look. "You are so meticulous, but it doesn't make you a good manager," Elizabeth said. "What do you mean?" Ruth asked with interest. The girl assured, "Don't deny. Probably you heard Lynn tried to fascinate my brother." In response, and trembling, the brunette said, "It has ordered her to move to the guest house." After these words, the look of the blonde again became cold and empty, like glass. "A homeless maid who lives in her own room of a guest house where my brother lives?" Elizabeth asked. "Probably you did not make this decision yourself. Did he prompted you?" asked the brunette in the senior maid. However, the elderly woman denied the lady, stating that her own decision. The brunette frozen in surprise, and with her a blonde. "Why does the maid lie for me?" She was worried, and she just replied, "I transferred you to the guest house and gave you my own room. Lynn has always taken the responsibility to turn off the light at night. Not wanting to disturb the servant, I decided to give her a room in the house," she explained. "After it is finishing, I do another bypass, and Lynn never left the borders of her bedroom," Ruth said. "Ladies, the eldest maid is telling a lie," one of the girls' servants exclaimed, raising her hand and attracting the attention of the attendees. The brunette smiled widely, laid her hand on her chin, and said, "Here as you wear. Can you share with them true, Marie? What do you do? Intention to put the main cleaner?" The maids shouted behind, grabbing the girl by her shoulders. "Don't dare me to lie. Do you have evidence?" the brunette asked, looking closely at the maid. "Yes, Millie," she replied without hiding her eyes. "I can say with complete confidence the rumors were truthful," Mary said, smiling at the corners of her lip, smiling at the older maid. "After all, I saw with my own eyes," the girl said, remembering how she followed Lynn that night. "I saw Lynn go to the young owner," the maid said, as if experiencing her eyes full of curiosity. "So we have a witness," she said, Brunutnik, taking her gaze on Marie. She smiled slightly. "What are you waiting for? Tie this scoundrel to the tree," Elizabeth said. Having said this, the other maids immediately rushed to grab Lynn, but they stopped in a loud voice, the eldest maid, Ruth. "Wait. How do you laugh not to obey my orders, Ruth?" "To dare to such, it means to call for yourself because you can easily become the next," Elizabeth strictly said. But the elderly woman interrupted her, turning to Marie. She asked the maid, "What did you do in a guest house?" "Sorry?" asked the girl with long hair. She clearly did not expect such a question from a woman, but then she proudly stated, "I just wanted to help. And what, do you think I tried to seduce the Lord? How is Lynn doing?" As if not paying attention to the justification of the main maid began to rush in her pockets in search of something. At this point, an elderly woman threw an entire bag full of various things under her feet. Seeing this, the girl opened her eyes wide and began to retreat. Obviously impressed and frightened by what she saw, she felt her fear. The maid reported, "Milady, in recent months, the staff of the hospitable home has mentioned the disappearance of some jewelry, and I found lost among Marie's things," said Ruth, and the listeners of the listeners. Did she put Lynn to avoid exposing? And at that moment, Marie dropped on her knees, all in despair. "They pour me with mud, milady," the girl exclaimed, reaching out to Elizabeth. "I really grabbed the jewelry, but clearly saw Lynn and the young owner," she exclaimed. "Well, she is a fool." It was the perfect chance to study Lynn while defending her reputation, she thought. But in a few seconds, Elizabeth began to bite her lips nervously, barely holding back the desire to scream. This non-sophisticated everything spoiled, Then the brunette turned away from Mary, casting her icy look. Direpo, how did you dare me to lie? She swore. Why stand? Look at her. The girl exclaimed with blue eyes, paying attention to others. Meanwhile, Lynn said, What happened just... Why did you decide to contact Marie for me? And why did the main maid take everything on herself to help? These questions raged in the head of Lynn. After all these events, Marie was kicked out of the estate. She barely left him as the other maids rushed to her with apology. She remembered it. The girls came up and said, Sorry, Lynn. And I also apologize for what I thought bad about you. Lynn just smiled back. The maids justified. Marie made us poison you. Do you want a piece of berry cake? They asked with hope. First, don't you have to apologize? Lynn asked. You're right. I completely forgot. Forgive, she replied. The blonde reflected how quickly everything became so peaceful again that she did not expect it all. All is well, I understand, she said, easily taking this new peace. After that, the girl sighed deeply and frozen in place. The blonde only barely opened her mouth. Then the girl with blue eyes suddenly fainted and fell to the floor, but the maid immediately picked it up, exciting. Lynn, with you all right? Lynn, is it true? Asked one of the maids, showing it in surprise. Others immediately pulled out. The girl pressed a handkerchief against her mouth, and tears flowed out of her blue eyes. She thought, Is it toxicosis? The maid struck another girl on the nape of his neck, reproaching. They told you that rumors are just a fiction. The girl in response quietly said, Excuse me, nausea is not always a sign of pregnancy. Maybe Lynn was just nervous. Meanwhile, the maids began to whisper behind. Someone suggested to leave Lynn to the hospital, but she assured she was feeling well. However, she thought it was difficult to describe her feelings. I am terribly, but at the same time I feel amazing excitement, Lynn thought. Suddenly the door of the room opened. So, it's you, Ruth, the man said, looking closely at the older woman in front of you. She closed the door gently. As you ordered, I have forever eliminated all the gossip about Lynn, said the maid. Martin stood near the window. His face illuminated a barely noticeable smile when he heard fresh news. The arms hidden behind the back were firmly compressed. Then he returned to Ruth. He said, Thank you for your hard work. Ruth replied, I only fulfilled your request, young lord, the older maid thought. I have long guessed that something was happening between young lord and Lynn. Do you want to say something? He asked. Martin has known since childhood, but never noticed such interest in it. No, briefly cut off the maid, crossing her hands on her long dress and barely moving his white division. The lady has her private life, and I have to keep her secrets, she thought. Then she learned that the guests had already arrived. And then, after a while, the eyes of young brunette opened the buds of white roses. When the man went a little forward, he noticed how tea was poured into the pink service. You can all go, Martin said, sitting in front of his two guests. They answered, Yes, my lord. What brought you here? Asked Brunet, raising his head sharply. His gaze was again harsh and cold. Elena Philip, he said to smiling guests whose eyes radiated warmth and tenderness to Martin. Philip said, Don't be so distant, because we have not seen so long ago. Martin reacted to it, saying, At the academy we looked at each other. Blondin said, He heard that the estate of Araput gained bad fame through night gives. The whole city was just talking about it, Philip asked. Why didn't you stop him? Elena, smiling, said, She could not stay. The cocktails were too tasty. Elena did not hide her admiration from the tasting of various drinks because it was so fun. However, she noted that parties would no longer arrange. Her interlocutor confessed that the interest in this has already disappeared. The man looked at the cup of tea again and said, Just don't say you have overcome the whole way just to get to know it. Well, this is one of the reasons why I'm here. Soon I become the heir to my father, Philip said, sadly lowering his eyes. He is very bad lately. The blonde sighed, remembering how he stood near the bed of a sick relative. The man reached out, and Blondin persistently said, When I inherit the title, I will not have time to meet you. Then the green-eyed blonde grabbed his father's hand, smiling when he tried to touch his son's heart. If you need help, let you know, Martin assured. And you how, Olenko? He asked. I soon become a doctor. she said with a smile. Brunene asked, "Will women be women?" She replied, "Yes, this is a new direction." To convince her father was difficult. Martin asked, "For what purpose did you come if you are going to come again?" Elena replied, "I wanted to see one acquaintance." But Philip suddenly intervened. After a while, the young girl admired the exquisite diamond and silver decoration. The girl could not look away from the decoration in which her soul lost. Sari asked, "What do I do with it?" "Lynn, assistant, it's time," the man exclaimed from behind the door. "The blonde has frozen in place. I go." The girl exclaimed and quickly rushed out of the room, and her apron lightly majos, as if catching the breath. "Recently, a young gentleman gave me a gift, a precious jewelry." His lips shone a gentle smile when he did it. I was so embarrassed that I did not dare to give up. She remembered how her cheeks were burning with a bright blush from only one glance. "Thank you," the girl said, to which the man answered at a careful look, who became warmer every moment. The master's face seemed extremely serious, so I just did not dare to ask him about the cause, she thought. After that, the knock of her heels was barely audible. The brunette with blue eyes came out of the room, firmly squeezing his fists. She smiled and exclaimed, "Lady Bedford." In front of her stood a young lady with short hair who welcomed her brunette. "Congratulations, Lady Araput," she asked. "Hope the journey didn't take you a lot of time?" To which Ellie replied, "On the contrary, the trip was even shorter than I expected." Lady Bedford helped Elizabeth go to the house and then said, "I asked the maid to prepare tea and treats. Today's tea party is of great importance, so we have to behave with dignity," linked Lynn. "Watching the talks of the noble lady is a real fun." Thought of a blonde admiring the smile of Millie. Teawa is usually talking about fashion or gossip. Then one of the ladies noted, "I received a marriage offer from your family." Ellie noted, "I am glad to hear it." The father was also interested. Bedford replied, "I wanted to answer in person." Apparently, it was necessary to write a letter. The brunette again took a cup of tea and said, "Don't worry, I'm here for this reason." Lady with a glowing smile said, "Father is convinced that you will become a wonderful daughter. In law. You have nothing to worry about." Then the blonde suddenly grabbed her heart, which seemed to jump out of the ribs now. Lynn thought, will the young Mr. Bedford soon combine the fate with a young lady? I knew he had already reached the age when it was time to get married. Lady Bedford wondered, would it be great to celebrate the wedding in the fall? How do you have the idea to arrange a holiday in our estate? She suddenly learned about his engagement. If he gets married, she thought, we'll have to stop our night meetings. So I should rejoice in this news, the blonde thought, but there was no trace of admiration on her face. And suddenly the blonde remembered how the man approached her, gently took his hands and slowly kissed. And suddenly the idea that the man who kissed and hugged her flashed. A girl with blue eyes thought, plunging into her reflections, after all, he will become a man of another. Recalling how firmly she held his hands, the girl plunged into reflections. A maid with green eyes standing nearby also drew attention to the changes in the girl. She turned to Lynn. "Lynn, are you all wet? All okay?" asked the maid, looking closely at the tears that drawn from the girl's cheeks nearby. "All is well with me, quite well," said the blonde, wiping tears. "It wounded me much deeper than I hoped." "I'm worried about Martin," the man said, watching the branches of trees. Another asked, "Why?" Elena insisted. "He never attended the academy. Everything he does is only hunting or alcohol party in a guest house." The girl noted, "Maybe marriage will make him think." The Philip smiled at this, exhaled, replied, "Time will tell." But suddenly, familiar faces appeared in front of them. Lady Elizabeth stood next to two maids. "Elizabeth!" Elena and Philip shouted loudly. The girl was amazed when someone was suddenly addressed to her. Eli came closer and asked, "Philippe? Oleno? When did you arrive?" The guy replied, "Long ago." We were already getting ready to come back. Elizabeth asked, "How sorry. If you have time, drink tea?" Philip replied, "I would like, but it's time to go." Forgive. Ladies with red hair noticed a maid standing behind with her head. In her thoughts flashed, "This girl. This is the same maid I noticed that night near the guest house." The girl remembered their first meeting. At that moment, a man ran to her to help. Elizabeth noted, "It's a pity to hear that. Hopefully, let's meet soon," the girl thought, barely touching her chin. Philip interestedly asked, "What do you think about?" "On the maid standing next to Ellie," Elena replied. Philip asked, "Do you mean Lynn?" She clarified, "Is this her name?" "She is quite unusual," Blondin said thoughtfully, lifting his clear green eyes to the sky. "The maid with silver hair," Philip said. The girl, having expanded with surprise, asked, "How can a simple girl be royal hair?" The girl was surprised. To which Philip replied, "That's right." And I was stunned. Interestingly coinciding, Its Highness of Regina is the only child of His Majesty, Philip said, and that made Elena think. That is why Martin is so fond of her. The girl became more and more aware of this. And at night, when the guest house was plunged into the darkness, something amazing happened. The man kissed the girl gently in her neck, and the blonde sighs heavily every time she felt it. The man gently hugged the girl with bright silver hair, after which she turned to him a little. "Young sir?" the girl said suddenly, opening her blue eyes wide. She seemed to be trying to resist this feeling. Finally, a young man with blue eyes and dark hair stopped, as if he did not dare to approach the girl. He was scratching to watch her more closely, and then the girl tightly closed her lips, as if trying to hold her tears. Her facial expression immediately revealed her emotions. "Maybe a wedding in Bedford's estate?" she asked Lady, passionately glowing her face with her hands. The girl swelled her eyes and said, "The daisies at this time are unsurpassed. The wedding ceremony promises to be refined." Recalling all those moments, the blonde suddenly frozen in bed, preventing her husband from getting closer to her. "What happened, Lynn?" asked the man, dropping on his knees next to her. The blonde clutched firmly into the sheets. The blonde reduced the look of her sky-blue eyes and asked, "Why did you give me this decoration?" The man frozen without expecting such a question. Surprised, he even asked the girl, "Just thought it suits you. Why do you ask?" said the man. Lynn also noted that this outfit is too sophisticated for a regular maid. "Leave these anxieties behind and focus on us," said a dark-haired man, gently kissing a blonde in his neck. However, taking a deep breath, the girl decided to ask a question, though she still chose the right words. "And what? How am I getting pregnant, my lord?" the girl asked carefully. Her words stunned her husband so much that he froze. He could not move. And at that moment, the man remembered the content of the letter. "Martha, Elizabeth is my favorite daughter," the girl wrote. "Let you have different parents," Mom repeated, bringing her thoughts to a crumpled piece of paper. Martin read carefully in every word. "I want you to protect it," Mom said. And at that moment, the guy began to pull his dark hair nervously, sweeping gloom. After that, the man grabbed the girl firmly by her shoulders and began to shake her vigorously. It was stunned. The girl's fair-haired girl tried to slide, rubbing her shoulder. "It hurts, sweet," she exclaimed in a trembling voice. "This will not happen," severely cut off the man. The girl only looked at him in a confusion, slightly opening her lips. "But there is a chance," the blonde shouted, looking closely at her husband. "There is none," said Brunette firmly. Without turning to the girl behind, the man strictly stated that the Duke of Araput did not need bastards. The girl froze. Her gaze changed instantly. He became full of disappointment, and her lips barely opened, preparing to deny. Then the girl clenched his fists, and the man said, "My interest is gone. Go away, and never ask again. Why am I feeling so much? This is because he gave up our child?" The girl thought, imagining flowers. On the street began to darken. The sun's rays disappeared behind the horizon, notifying the approach of sunset. Someone was in amazement. It was Muriel. Her green eyes only narrowed in passing when she cast her eyes back where the maid still remained. Behind was a blonde, which was completely red. "You look awful," the maid said. "Just tired," the girl with blue eyes answered briefly, but Muriel asked again, "Maybe it's worth a rest?" They stood side by side. "No, everything is fine with me," the girl said confidently. But suddenly her legs began to tremble as if made of cotton. "Lynn, are you okay?" Muriel asked with anxiety. But the blonde only breathed deeply, which did not go unnoticed to Elizabeth. The merciful came from her place and asked the maids nearby, "What is the fuss here?" The girls helped to get up Lynn. "Lynn is not the best look," she said, watching a girl who could barely lift her eyelids. She was very sweaty. Another maid explained that for several days he has been getting sick. Then Elizabeth began to creak his teeth, dissatisfied. Lady asked indignantly, "Does she constantly have me to create a trouble?" "Muriel, bring her to the doctor, please." But immediately she agreed. "I thought it was cold, having a morning in cold air." The blonde remembered. "Thank you that I went with me," said the blonde, to which Muriel replied, "Don't worry, I am glad to rest." "Are you sure you want to go yourself?" asked the maid in blondes. "Yes, all is well, I'm handling," she assured, and again. And so, after a few moments, the doctor addressed her. "I congratulate you." The girl, not quite understanding, asked, "What, apologize?" The man slightly ran his chin and a thick mustache, then turned to the girl. "After a series of examinations, I can say with confidence you are pregnant," the doctor said, and the girl was numb. She was captured by full horror. And here the carriage turned back. The day was clear and sunny, and the horses were rushed to the duchy. The girl, looking at the window, sat in a carriage. She gently touched her belly. Meanwhile, Muriel, with wide-open green eyes, watched her girlfriend concerned. "Lynn, the question is, everything is fine with you? You have such a serious look. What did the doctor say?" she asked. The girl replied, "Cold." Muriel tried to reassure his girlfriend, saying, "Yeah, of course. I hope you are recovering soon." Lynn smiled slightly. "The doctor stressed that you are at the initial stage of pregnancy, so be careful. Try to eat balancedly." The man asked in surprise, "Why did you come? Where is your husband?" Lynn replied that he was at work. "It is not necessary to come alone. The next time, bring the man." The doctor insisted, and she just thought, "I do not out of my own will." She clenched her belly, looking thoughtfully. "I wonder when it becomes obvious. The gentleman may immediately pay attention. He sees my body every night," Lynn thought, thinking again about his cold words. "I don't need bastard." Suddenly, the girl stopped, straightening like a string. It seemed to her as if someone suddenly knocked out all the air out of her lungs. She clenched her lips. "Since my mother died, I stayed alone. But this child will give me a new family," the girl thought, plunging into the memories of her mother. She had no doubt that they would pick up the baby as soon as she was born. "So I thought the blonde, imagining a small baby palm. I'll do anything to protect my child." She decided, clutching her hand to her chest. Her face became serious. And so, that night, the girl appeared again in front of a young master. He asked, "What did you say?" "I have something in mind," Lynn said. Martin, surprised, replied, "You never asked anything." "What exactly do you want?" "I wish a little shiny little thing," the girl replied, and her hair seemed to shine in the night darkness. "For example, some decoration, such as a necklace or ring," thought the girl, barely climbing from bed. Martin listened carefully to her. "Do you behave somehow strange? What happened to you?" asked Brunet, smiling. He reached out to the blonde. The brunette said, "You are about to disappear from my life." Martin gently ran his hand on the cheek of the blonde, and she frozen in real estate. The girl covered his eyelids, gently holding Martin's hand. She said quietly, "You are cute, young sir. I hope you will never forgive me." My stomach began to grow and my breasts increase. Mention Lynn. Her thoughts noted that, while the abdomen increased constantly, she was more likely to remain in clothing during intimate moments. The young gentleman gifted me with small gifts. The girl remembered, holding various jewelry. This should be enough with excess, she thought the blonde, looking at the jewelry laid out on the bed. I hope that when I sail I will be able to get a decent amount for them, considered the girl, carefully examining the precious stones. I do not want my child to live in suffering as a bastard, Lynn thought, imagining how the anger of society would fall. I have to raise enough money for both of us, the girl thought, imagining a young lady with her baby. In the meantime, please take care of yourself. The girl thoughtfully put her hands on her stomach, her eyelids gently closed. She turned her head slightly to the open window, plunging into reflections. The moment will soon come when you have to leave this estate. Subsequently, a little later, the girl slowly wore a nightshirt, gently pulling the fabric. The man asked her, "Why not stay a little longer? Do you have a day off today?" He pressed a pillow firmly. "I need to the city," replied Blonde, to which the man asked again in surprise, "Why?" Climbing out of bed. "I feel no matter, so I'm going to the doctor," Lynn replied. He immediately stated, "I'll go with you." She denied, "People will start talking." "Okay, take my crew. I'll wait here," Martin said. The girl turned and her hair crumbled around her face. Then the girl with blue eyes smiled gently, looking at her husband in front of her. Her cheeks blushed a little. "Thank you," she said, and Martin thought. He was wondering why Lynn has been smiling much more often. Martin felt something wrong. Brunette thought about it. The next day, Lynn tied a bag filled with jewelry. She dressed in modest clothing in which it was almost impossible to recognize. The girl almost never stopped running, as if she wanted to disappear from the field of view. Lynn felt shortness of breath became more and more difficult, and breathing burdens. In her thoughts, one idea was throbbing. "I will leave the estate of Ariput forever." Her eyes were frightened. "Need to go before I am caught." The girl thought deeply, pressing her hands to her small tummy, and then by chance, the girl slightly affected someone's shoulder. The blonde was surprised. "I apologize, ladies," said the blue-eyed girl, leaning in a bow before a young woman standing in front of her. "Sorry, everything is fine with you?" asked that girl suddenly, disturbing her big blue eyes. "Lady Schoffelheim?" She thought the blonde, looking carefully at Elena. The same, in turn, added, "I broke my head over who could be." "I apologize, milady. It's not intentional," said Lynn. "Calm, everything is fine," Elena assured her. But suddenly the red-haired girl stopped. Her yellow eyes expanded with fear. She was engulfed in true horror. After a few moments, the blonde turned to Elena. "Milady?" Her voice trembled, and the words stumbled on each other. "Why do you look so surprised?" said the blonde until Milady remained stationary with unexpected horror. "Nothing wrong. Take care of yourself," Elena said, looking away. "Thank you, with your permission," Lynn replied. And so the girl moved away, trying to escape from this mysterious estate Ariput. Elena only watched her silently. "Something happened, ladies?" asked one of the maids. Elena replied, "All is well," and thought, "Did I go wrong? It's just impossible." Although, is it still possible? She reflected the lady, not looking from the graceful gait of the blonde ahead. Lynn was already in the city, as she was informed. "It is nice to deal with you. I will offer a high price if you bring jewelry," assured it. The bag was quite heavy. The blonde, having firmly covered the money, thoughtfully reflected, lifting it. Then the blonde smiled gently, plunging into reflections. "It turned out that the little things managed to get more money than I expected. I turned all my things into cash. Now you need to persuade Cooker to return one." The girl was thinking, and then the blonde whispered quietly, "What to do? It's the only way to get out of this village," she thought, but suddenly someone grabbed her shoulder. The girl shuddered at the surprise, covered by fear. "Lynn, what are you doing here?" asked the man. The girl lifted her eyes to the stranger, numb on the spot. "What are you doing here?" said the Minus, smiling warmly. He delicately put her hand on her shoulder, and the girl brought her eyes on him. "What do I do?" the girl worried, delving into thoughts. Meanwhile, a Minus repeatedly repeated, "This is so coincided. You have a day off today?" The girl pulled a friendly smile and replied, "Yes." Then she thought, "Why did I meet Minos right now?" "I scared you?" he asked. "No, just thought," Lynn replied. "How are you?" she asked. "I am doing the task now," he said briefly. "I didn't know that you were busy with work now." The blonde was surprised. After that, Minos opened his eyes wide, looking at it. "Maybe let's drink tea, Lynn." "You're worth a little rest. You look so pale." The man insisted. I need to leave from here as soon as possible, the girl thought, looking with fatigue at her husband. But I can never see Minos again, said the girl thoughtfully, admiring the warmth of the young man's gaze. So the girl accepted his invitation. They entered a cozy restaurant where the blonde chose chamomile tea. They sat opposite each other, enjoying the tea. The girl tilted her head, and a tense silence reigned between them. The taste, as always, is impressive, said the man, cutting silence in his own words. And the girl was only silent, not finding what to say. I agree, the girl said, and firmly squeezing the white division of a modest dress, felt her legs began to tremble. Lynn, the man suddenly said, and the girl with a reflex shock brought her blue, full of voids to him. I saw how many people left work in docks. This is not a simple matter, said the Minus, covering his eyes. When the man opened his eyes again, he was slightly swollen and noted that he has now achieved considerable success in understanding other people. I can immediately identify a newcomer who will immediately soap away. So why do I think you are the same? He asked with a clearly evaluating look. Don't pay attention. Just intuition, you know. The man said with no laughing, leaning on the back of his chair. Finally, the girl dared to go to the boy. Minos, there is something I have to tell you. The man was barely noticeable, the girl thought, firmly clamping her lips. I don't want to lie anymore. It is enough that I was already misleading the young owner. In fact, I plan to leave the Duchy of Araput, the girl said, and the husband stopped for a moment. From what miracle? Asked the man, staring a little. Wait, are you allowed to just leave your job? He asked in surprise. I don't understand how you can just say that you leave us. Meanwhile, the girls were whispering. It seems to be divorcing with him. The thing I run, the girl said, pressing her arms to her stomach. The blonde shyly took her blue eyes away. I have my own reasons. There is no strength to stay here. The girl insisted, while the man seemed to be able to deny. The man frowned his eyebrows and scratching them nervously. Finally, he addressed Lynn. Lynn, let you ask you questions. Did you really go without telling me a single word? The man asked, looking closely at her. The girl clamped the edge of her dress, answering in a quiet voice. Sorry. Suddenly, the man jumped, cutting his hands into the table, and thundered that he burst from emotions. I just don't believe my eyes. Lynn is affected in place. However, the red young man suddenly squeezed his jaw. His gaze when he watched the girl. He felt a strange internal tension. He focusedly focused when the girl had a reflexive belly, as if trying to become invisible. This thought returned him to the name of Lynn. Something unexpected flashed on her face. Minos looked thoughtfully at her blinking blue eyes, trying to understand what happened. Since childhood, Lynn has overcome many difficulties, but despite all, it maintained silent stability. This testified to the seriousness of the situation, he reflected. Later, Minos calmly addressed the girl. What are your plans for the future? How did you want to leave the village? She was about to use the carriage. The girl replied. You will be caught immediately, the man said in surprise. Minos asked, why not use the ship? You remember, I work in docks, he recalled. I will get a ticket for you to the first ship tomorrow, the man assured. Lynn did not believe heard and asked. But I have one condition, the man said gently, putting his hand on the girl's shoulder. He exhaled with effort. The guy smiled warmly and said, Promise you to write when you are in a new place. It is important for me to know how you are doing. The girl stopped, looking at the boy with a warm look. Her eyebrows dropped inadvertently, and the cheeks turned into a bright red color. So, said the girl, which the man was distrustfully asking, do you promise? Finally, the blonde glanced and confidently answered, yes. I spent my last day in the village with Minos. The girl thought, remembering their walk. I thought if we were destined to cross again. Thoughtfully thought the girl. Suddenly, something interesting attracted her attention on the horizon. I dreamed of expressing gratitude for his kindness, the girl thought, stretching a red-haired man with a checkered scarf. An adult has groaned, receiving this gift. Looking at the girl in surprise, he carefully tied the scarf around his neck, making a funny look. And to achieve this in all possible ways I have, the girl thought. and then laughed at a ringing laugh, looking at a friend. Manos, you were around when the most difficult period came in my life, the girl thought. Meanwhile, a deep night came imperceptibly. Minos led it to the room and said, "You will stop at the hotel. It is located in a remote place and no one guesses you are there." He assured, "I'll be back tomorrow morning with a ticket to the ship." Lynn replied, wished, "Thank you, good night." She opened the window. "I don't believe, but tomorrow I will leave this place forever." The awareness of this seemed strange. She looked up to the sky, but suddenly the girl's mood changed. Her look became sad and frustrated. The wind tore her hair, giving the look even more melancholy. "This is the first decision I made for myself," the girl thought, remembering how she served others from early childhood. "My life was always under someone's control." The blonde was thinking, remembering how in adulthood she remained a devoted servant. "Why did you have to suppress your own I?" Lynn thought. This continued in relationships with Martin. Now everything is different. I have a new goal for life. At this point, Lynn turned away from the window and gently held her hand on her stomach. It is so difficult to leave the native village. It flashed in the thoughts of blondes. She swirled her blue eyes and frowned. "I will be sad for Muriel's main maid and all other maids," she thought, remembering their smiles. "I will even be sad for Lady Elizabeth," the girl thought, remembering her always dissatisfied face. And Mr. Martin, a young girl, imagining his friendly smile, who always decorated the face of a blue-eyed brunette. "Farewell. I will keep you in my heart with love," the girl thought, looking at the night sky again. And finally, the morning came. The Ariuput estate was filled with life. The servants have already started their business, and the inhabitants woke up from sleep. The man quickly moved the long, spacious corridors of a huge, striking structure. "Last night, Lynn never visited my rooms," thought Martin, walking slowly with her home, where gray-blue carpets creeped under his feet. It was unusual. The driver returned without her, explaining that she had to execute the assignment. He was thinking about it. "What is happening?" said the brunette when he came to him. "What are you trying to say? Repeat faster." "How is it possible?" Elizabeth shouted, to which the maid replied, "We are looking for her everywhere." "What is going on here?" Brunetta asked sternly, entering the room. The maid, looking at him, asked in surprise, "My lord, what are you doing here?" "How is she bold?" Elizabeth exclaimed. The maids were hired as if trying to justify the young owner. "The fact is that Lynn, a personal maid of Millie, disappeared." The man froze, widely revealing his eyes with surprise. A lively street rushed to the girl. Everyone was in a hurry, saying goodbye to loved ones, as if trying to make it more than time. "Here's a ticket to the ship, as promised," said Minos, stretching the girl's ticket. The blonde took it. He noted that in the city of Neora should be safe to live alone. She responded, promising to never forget everything he did for her. "It is so sorry to part with you." The man sighed and gently stroked the young blonde on his head, stopped for a moment. Then the man smiled brightly and said, "Promise you will be happy." The smile turned out a little sad. "And don't forget to write," the red boy reminded. The girl looked at him with sympathy, holding back tears. "Thank you, Minos," the girl thought, slowly climbing the ship. She saw her husband waving with both hands, saying goodbye to the girl forever. Her hand barely rose, but the girl also hurried to say goodbye, mentally adding, "Though I go far, but in my memory you will stay forever." The man did not move out of place, even when the ship disappeared behind the horizon. Minos was escorting the girl. Meanwhile, there was a loud cry in another place. Curse! Someone accidentally smashed the whole service in one go. It was Martin, who was difficult to breathe, trying to comprehend the information just received. His hands waved chaotically around. What in the hell happened? The man asked in a break, straining the jaw. His gaze darkened and the veins were swollen by irritation. Lynn disappeared. It seems that she escaped the same day when she went to the hospital, the boy thought, reproducing her image in memory. "I found her room." The man remembered when he was turning her things. Behind him was a surprised Muriel. He realized that her things had disappeared. The maids began to whisper among themselves. What does the owner do in her room? Did the rumors be true? Then a blue-eyed man with an exhausted look dropped to the sofa, breathing deeply again. His thoughts were confused in a chaotic dance. The man thought, why am I so strange? After all, she is just a maid. Why is it so excited? Suddenly, the door knocked. The man crossed his hands on his chest and cast a strict look forward. His eyes became cold again. The owner ordered, "Come in." A young man's head appeared in the light door frame. He said, "This is me, my lord." Blue-eyed brunetta asked, "Did you fulfill my assignment, Tommy?" The servant diligently explained the situation. "I searched all the possible places where she could be," said the guy with wavy hair thoughtfully, thinking aloud. After scratching his back, he tried to find a solving. "Have you seen this girl?" mentioned Tommy, finally asking the bearded by order. "Yes, I remember her," the man replied, wiping his glasses. He unfolded a piece of paper, opening his eyes wide. The man said, "She appeared with a bag filled with jewelry that much exceeded the cost of what I had with me." "Wait, did he mention the jewelry?" said the blue-eyed brunette, listening to the story of his devoted servant. And here he remembered how surprised her first request. That night she persistently repeated, "I need something." And then the blonde appealed to Milord for a request. "I want a little brilliant decoration," she said, looking surprisingly seriously. "Start collecting things, Tommy," said a blue-eyed brunette. The servant asked, "I apologize, what did you mean?" "It turns out that all this time you planned to escape," he realized, saying aloud. She could hide in another village, so he ordered, "Find it at any cost." The man said sternly, "Find it and bring it to me." He thought for a moment. "Lynn, did you really believe that you could just leave me?" The man thought, "I will find you at any cost." Meanwhile, the girl was already far in the sea, sailing further. The time of lunch. Finally, food. They sounded around joyful exclamations. They spilled unusual citrus note soup. "Try, probably you have already hungry," a woman named Lynn said. Blonde enthusiastically responded, "Thank you." The stranger said, "You are so bold that you are traveling alone." The blonde answered her sincere laughter, but suddenly her attention was drawn to the voice of a young child who exclaimed, "Mom, I'm hungry. Wait, let's go, but now open your mouth," the woman said, smiling gently. She fed her son from a spoon. "What a sweet child," Lynn thought. The boy asked, "When will we finally get off the ship?" Mom, smiling, replied, "Wait a little." And here the girl smiled, watching family harmony. She whispered, "Soon I become the same mother." The girl suddenly thought, "Mother." Her eyes were wide open, as if the world was shining with brighter colors. I never called myself so. And she didn't even imagine that one day she was. "After my mother's death, I was surrounded by good people," she summed up. The girl remembered how cheerfully laughed at the company of other maids, and how a widely smiled Muriel. However, somewhere in my heart I felt this wasteland. She thought, imagining a broken crystal heart. "This baby will become my family," the girl thought, gently putting her hands on his stomach. "The baby, the mother, will do his best to protect you," the blonde thought, turning to the unborn baby. Meanwhile, bright sunlight filled the guest house with light. The radiance played on the windows, reflecting the roof. "Thank you for traveling such a long road, your light," the man said, removing his black cape. The man asked, "How was your visit to the Imperial Palace?" Mr. Arryput replied, "Not too good." The owner noted that His Majesty has been sick for several years. He scolded, neglecting his chin. "In recent days, the Emperor is in a critical state." The man remembered, looking at the painful expression of His Majesty. "Princess Regina, the only heir to the throne, can take the throne faster than we predicted." He repeatedly repeated. He remembered the face of the blonde at the moment when she clenched her father's hand and said, "She is smart and had every chance to become a wise ruler." Then the owner asked, "By the way, what is Martin?" "Did he finally?" The servant, bowing, answered. The Bogretsky, taking the gaze of shy gray eyes, finally said, "Since then, as the maid has disappeared, in the hospitable house he drinks to the loss of memory," said Dvoretsky, thinking about scattered bottles with alcohol. He noted that he had never seen the gentleman. The Duke only reacted indifferently. This is nonsense. It is just an unhappy maid. But when the man went to his office, the door opened again. The Duke shouted loudly, "Come in!" The man was genuinely surprised when he saw a girl in front of him. The Duke said, "Glad to meet you again, Lady Bedford." Smiling, the girl said, "Undoubtedly I had to come, your lust." The brunette remained on the blue sofa, throwing his head on the back. He took a deep breath, trying to gather with thoughts, but suddenly the loud knock on the door made him open his eyes. However, he did not rush with the answer. Lady Bedford appeared at the door. Smiling warmly, she addressed her husband. "I congratulate you, my lord. I do not remember to invite you to enter," he said, but Lady Bedford, ignoring his words, went on with a smile. "Thank you for such a hospitable reception." The girl said, "You know that our hostage ceremony has been in a few days. I would like to discuss some details." However, a blue-eyed man interrupted the lady, turning to her with harshness. Smiling, he said, "Lady Bedford, we both realize that this marriage is a matter of our families. My opinion about the ceremony to you nothing," he said, and suddenly, after a moment, the girl clung to the back of the chair and said, "You are especially prickly today." The lady said, "And don't even try to say that you are moving for a maid. You are a nobleman, so why not act according to this status?" Lady Bedford, blinking her eyes, smiled happily and said, "I just can't wait when the Duchess of Araput is to be the Duchess." The girl persistently repeated, "I'm an ambitious woman." The man looked at her. She turned away, saying, "Whether you have feelings for me or not, it doesn't matter. The nobles do not marry because of love." Meanwhile, another servant Martin wandered the streets, showing a passerby portrait of Lynn. He addressed the people asking, "Have you seen this woman?" People wondered, could such a girl live in our village? If so, I would certainly invite her on a date. "She's already busy," one man exclaimed. The other asked, "What? Looking for problems?" Tommy moved away. Again, the failure. The man flashed into his head while he corrected his hat. He wondered, a few days have passed since Lynn disappeared. Although we were not very close, I remembered how once the girl approached me and pleased with a variety of flavors. She was the girl who taught the full so that I got more food. Why is she so good? He thought. I knew that the young master invited her to the guest house every night. The guy again plunged into memories of how he saw her at the door. In the afternoon, it does not give it rest, but at night, the master. I sympathize with her, the guy thought, looking out from behind the tree. In ordering the young owner, Tommy bypassed every local resident. He showed them her portrait and asked them, "What? Searching a girl?" Once asked a group of young guys. Tommy felt mild embarrassment. They claimed that the woman would never travel herself. However, there is a hotel at the port providing travelers. Finally, reaching the specified place, the man felt his feet tremble from fatigue. He breathed heavily and barely kept on his feet. "Why is this hotel located so deep in the forest?" The man exclaimed loudly, finally approaching a small building. And it was noticed by a young boy who was surprised to look at Tommy, who spoke again. "I die. Are you one, sir?" The boy asked, running to a tired servant. He asked him in surprise. And here the guy grabbed a man bag and exclaimed loudly, "Mom, we have a guest." He tried to pull the bag out of his hands. The man asked, "What are you doing with my bag?" The boy, smiling, replied, "But I just want to help. I'll take it for you." But suddenly Tommy exclaimed, "I'm not going to stop here. Did you see this girl once?" He stretched a portrait. The young man replied, "Yes, I remember her." Tommy asked in surprise, "Really? Can you tell her?" The teenager emphasized that she was extremely good. She treated with candy. However, it seemed sick, so she visited the doctor. Later, Tommy also decided to visit the doctor. Only when he saw him did the older man scratch his chin and thoughtfully said, "I remember this patient." The doctor said calmly, "She turned to me because of pregnancy." Tommy, however, was widely opened with surprise. The doctor asked, "Are you her husband?" And Tommy, still immersed in reflection, immediately replied, "Of course, no. If you're please. Is Lynn pregnant?" The man reflected, looking carefully at the portrait of the young blonde woman. Then the man grabbed his head, whispering quietly, "My lord will be in fury when I will tell him." He lifted the portrait above, trying to hide despair on his face. However, he thought, I have no doubt that my father is a young master. What do I do? Suddenly, the man exclaimed, fascinated by looking at the sunset. The trees around rustled under the breath of the wind, and so, before the young man appeared a dazzling white silver strands, they always looked extremely. The young owner, the girl whispered, gently hugging brunette with blue eyes. His face rolled tears. They lay in the lake among flowering plants, the man resting on her knees, and the girl gently hugged him, admiring every stroke on his face. Afterwards, a girl with blue eyes smiled gently. A little bit of her eyes, she looked at her abandoned lover. Lin, have you come back? Martin asked, as if he did not believe his eyes. Only after a few moments of hesitation did he dare to reach out to her. But as soon as he touched her, the girl disappeared in the air. She literally broke up into the particles just in his eyes. Seeing this, the man was very frightened, opening his blue eyes wide. He retreated, waving his hair, but the man woke up. He was lying in the bath, breathing hard. Then he took a few deep breaths, trying to calm down. The man stretched his hand thoughtfully. 5 days have passed since Lin left the estate. He remembered, he thought. She was always around, just reach out. I can't accept what she lied and left me. The upset man closed his eyes and rubbed with their hands with importance. Hair carefully fell on the face, interfering. At the same time, as long as one part seeks to punish her for leaving, the other simply sad. Martin thought, Good afternoon, my lord. The girl greeted when she went into a guest house after a certain time. The sun was already shining in the zenith. Suddenly, there was a slight stroke of water. Someone decided to pour tea. In front of them were white mugs on the table. Lady Bedford said, I congratulate you in our estate. This is your first visit, so I chose the most exquisite tea we have. Martin sat opposite, and the girl said again, Is it an inuchak from Tarasun? You taste like... He replied, Exquisite. The girl smiled and asked, Don't want to join us for dinner? There will be a fresh deer on the table. Then the man turned a cup of tea on the table and said, It is not worth it. It won't take much time. His voice gained a removed sound. The girl looked slightly in surprise at her husband, asking with caution, What do you mean, my lord? Lady Bedford, I came to break our engagement, the man said. The girl was surprised to expand her eyes covered by fear. Your luminosity, I don't understand you, said the lady, looking uncertainly at the new moon. He replied, That's all. Let's pretend that nothing happened. The man got up and said, You can say that it is my fault. Lady wondered, What made you change your mind? Martin asked. Do you need to report the reason? She, with her hands, replied, As irresponsible. Our marriage is arranged by families. Behind the maid began to whisper, but Lady insisted on her own. You have no right to give up marriage at will. To begin with, I did not agree. The man said suddenly, forcing the girl, from anger, to bite her lips. I have no intention of breaking the engagement. I will say that this conversation has never happened, said Lady, moving away from her husband. Cancellation of the ceremony will be the best solution for you, lady, said the man, throwing a piece of paper at her feet. What is it? The girl called, without restraining from the sudden explosion of emotions. She was already too exhausted, so her eyes opened wide from surprise. As far as I understand, you have been in a love relationship with your Trevham's groom for a long time, the man said, looking closely at the piece of paper. Then Martin added, Who, if not you, should understand how immoral to lose his innocence before marriage? The girl exclaimed, Are you trying to blackmail me? He did nothing wrong. The guy froze in place. That is why I ask you to accuse me of a prestige break, the man said. The girl clenched his fists. Do you really do so because of your low maid? Lady Bedford asked, casting an indifferent look at the young man. The man shook his head, covering his bright blue eyes. That's right, he said thoughtfully, blowing his silence. What a stupidity on your part is to break the engagement through a maid, the girl exclaimed, looking at the floor. I have to make every effort to become the Duchess of Aruput, because this marriage will unite our minds, she thought. I have to do it for the sake of Bedford's family, the girl thought, closing his palm. Her gaze dropped down. I understand what you are swaying, the merciful, said the man. The girl looked at him in surprise, shaky between surprise and confusion. He turned away from the girl, going away, and added, I believe that we are able to choose our own destiny. Sometimes you should look at your fears directly in the eye, the young man said. Hearing these words, she opened her eyes wide. Are you ready to sacrifice your own happiness for the welfare of Bedford family? Asked the man. The maids looked enthusiastically. In a few days, Lady Bedford changed her decision and fled with a groom named Travis. The man considered the situation. Instead of a wedding, now cancel. The man kept the mug thought, trying to realize the new reality. I can't believe it, he whispered. The Duke said, she escaped with the secret lover on the night before the engagement. Martin responded in surprise. What do you say? You were okay? You communicated, his father asked. Martin calmly replied, It's all right. I even went hunting. The Duke noted, Let's get compensation for the incident. Martin replied to this, The rumors do not subside, so let's leave this question. Then the guy noted that the Bedford mind seems to be almost exhausted. It is better to focus on Regina families. Having thought, the man acknowledged, Martin really became an adult. I thought that such reflections were not peculiar. And finally said, There is one opportunity. And then the man, cutting silence, dared to ask, Martine, there is something I want to ask you. I heard you looking for a missing maid. Do you feel special feelings for her? He asked, and Martin suddenly frozen as if he were influenced by a charm. I am not sure about this, father, Martin replied, lowering his eyes as if trying to gather confused thoughts. However, said the man thoughtfully, remembering the blonde face. She rarely smiled, and her hair fell as if a stream. But thoughts about her do not leave me, the young man said. He still imagined her gentle and warm smile. The sloping man just smiled slightly, curling his arms on his chest. He warmly looked at his son and stopped for a moment. Of course, said the elderly man thoughtfully, covering his eyes. His smile gradually faded away, and a heavy breath escaped from his chest. And here the Duke said, I am sure that Her Highness is in love with a knight from a small neighboring country. He imagined Regina glowing with happiness next to him, thinking, now social status no longer interferes with marriage with his beloved. Then he said, If you find her, let him know. I would be glad to meet her. Martin replied, Okay, his father. All this time, the young lady stood behind the open doors. Martin assured, I will make every effort to find it, Elizabeth thought. What, in fact, do they speak? Are they planning to choose a maid for the post of the next Duchess of Erput? And here the girl remembered the moment when she first brought a young blonde to them. I brought Lynn here. Then the brunette remembered the day when she made Lynn on the feast and apologized. The girl remembered the moments when she managed to drive her disappointment on her, thinking, I just wanted to release her emotions. If Lynn marries Martin and becomes a master of the estate, then I will find myself on my knees. This is how Elizabeth reflected. And then the brunette imagined a blonde looks at her with a cold look, with the easily cheeky smile on her lips. She will tell everyone how I treated her. She would certainly revenge, the girl thought, biting her lips. I can't allow this. I need to do my best, Elizabeth reflected, deciding firmly. Elizabeth realized that she should prevent Lynn back. That evening, she met a mysterious person hiding her face. Here's your promised deposit, said the girl with blue eyes, stretching a large blue bag full of coins. The man was surprised to say, Thank you. This sum exceeded my expectations. To which Elizabeth replied, If you succeed, you will get even more. The man smiled, gambling, and reached out to Mildy. His gaze was full of passion when he asked, What do you want? Suddenly, a shadow of thought appeared on his face. It's not difficult, the girl said, passing a sheet with a portrait of a blonde. A light smile flashed on her face. Find this girl. Do you know her? This maid has recently escaped, Brunutka said. He replied, Of course I know her. She was your personal maid. Lady noted, That's how? Well, it will simplify the task. She is far away, she said thoughtfully, imagining how the maid is lost in the dark lanes of different cities. I would like you to find her. the girl said in the imagination, drawing a stage in which the man encroaches with her with a knife. Then the blonde with blue eyes was frightened, sharply opened them, and quickly turned. And end it with her. As evidence, bring me her eyes and curls of hair, she said with a smile. A black night has come. A crowd gathered near the bed, and one blonde was humbly kneeling. My dear daughter Regina, the old man whispered, breathing heavily. His gaze was already empty, and a small beard was visible on his face. The man said, it seems to my end. The blonde wept, squeezing his arm even stronger. Don't leave me, she pleaded. Then his grandfather gently ran his hand on the cheek of the blonde, wiping tears. I have to tell you something, he said. The man noted the long silver hair of the girl and added, I was silent about it for a very long time. However, it is time to open your secret. The old man whispered, presenting Regina another girl. Soon the ship went ashore. Seagulls were circling above them, as if accompanied by the right way. Lynn landed in a small port town and went for a walk in narrow streets, enthusiastically looking at various structures. The blonde smiled, lightly stroking her stomach, muttered something under her nose. What a wonderful weather here. I spent several days in Neora, always working for others. I could not imagine how you feel harmonious in freedom, she thought. Wait, she thought, passing past the carts. The man sounded loudly. I ask everyone who goes to Puro. Gather. Hearing these words, the girl froze for a moment, stopping as a statue. Then she curiously turned her gaze to a stranger. Curiosity shone in her eyes. One ticket to Pioro, the girl said, giving a check. The man reached out and politely answered the unfamiliar. I gladly congratulate you. I cannot climb the patch through my stomach, realized the blonde, clumsily stopping. Noticing her embarrassment, a stranger approached her. He reached out and suggested, take a hand. It was a harsh summer woman who asked, don't see that people are delayed through you? Her voice was cool, but the actions emitted heat. The girl took her grandmother's hand and thanked her. Soon, after a few moments, the crew finally moved forward, and the wheels were circled vividly against the background of the sun. They moved between the trees, whose leaves were already bleeding with yellow tones, and on some branches they had already crumbled. It was felt that the warm autumn entered its rites. It is said that the path to Pioro is quite long. The blue-eyed girl thought, pulling a toy hair. The whole journey will take the south, and we'll have to go through the irregular forest. The girl thoughtfully sewed an eye. The blonde realized that she needs to settle where the young master will not be able to find her. After these thoughts, she looked around. Somewhere far away. My unborn baby is bastard, but in her veins the blood of the Araput family flows. She thought, if the duchy is learning about the existence of a baby, then my baby will be taken away. Lynn thought, imagining this terrible perspective. Then Lynn would not even be able to touch the little one. It would only have to dream of striving for him, realizing this painful restriction. I can't allow this, the girl thought. Suddenly, the blonde straightened sharply, decisively turning her head. The girl turned sharply and looked forward. Other girls also drew attention to the same direction. One of them smiled. Are we already in the forest? Lynn thought, realizing that they had already moved away from the port town, and the trees were already beating in front. Suddenly, the horses made strange sounds, and the girl, having opened her eyes wide, tried to stay in place. What happened? Asked one of the girls, and the other added, why did the bandage stop? What is the cry? Suddenly, the bright voice of the man sounded, interrupting them. In his hands, he held a gun and, noticing the girls, pressed a little on the trigger. Everyone is silent, said the man in the mask, clearly drawing the order. There were 2 more robbers silently behind his back. The man frowned, crossing his gaze with the audience. His facial expression became threatening. He commanded a deaf voice. Give everything you have, emphasizing your words with a pistol demonstration. Want to live? He insisted, and the girl froze with horror. Her eyebrows, like snow, frowned. And so, in the other corner, she glowed the candle brightly, accelerating the darkness of the night around. She sewed like a real star. Regina stopped at the closed door. The imperial cape fell from her shoulders, and many candles were shimmering around the floor. Your Majesty, a young gentleman Aruput came to you, the man said behind, and Regina turned. I congratulate you, the son of the Empire. the man said, bowing low before the girl. She, in response, happily said, "And I am glad to see you." "We have not seen you since your coronation," he said. Regina replied, "Yes, we were both absorbed." Regina noted, "I heard that your engagement has been canceled. I do not own details, but I hope you feel better. Is there anyone who is interested in?" the girl asked, smiling with intrigue. Her blue eyes flashed with a cunning Pegasus. Smiling, Brunette replied, "Unfortunately, no." Her Majesty has already said. The girl nodded with understanding. "Of course I was just interested. Still, I am worried about something." Regina stopped. "And what can it be?" he asked. The girl thoughtfully honored her chin and said, "Before his death, my father told me that I had a sister." Hearing this, the man opened his blue eyes in surprise. He froze for a moment without even dare to move. "If imperial blood flows in her veins, then the hair will be noble, silver," the girl said. "So my main task is to find your sister," insisted the blonde. Martin, interested in looking, asked, "Maybe I can somehow help?" The room was shaking from a loud blow to the door. Tommy, sitting in a chair, raised his hands. Martin exclaimed, "Get ready, we go immediately." The guy in confusion said, "I thought you wouldn't be so long, my lord." Brunetta quickly approached the man. "We need to find immediately," said the man with blue eyes. It seemed that his face was burning with impatience. "I will explain then," he added, focused. "This is the meeting." "I'm a little hurry," Martin said. However, the girl replied with complaints. "Do you really greet a good friend?" "Come on to the substance immediately. I said that it was busy," he said. The girl's face was concentrated and dissatisfied, and her lips were tightly clenched. "I heard you tore the engagement because of the maid. Occasionally, it is not Lynn to call her?" asked the girl. The man's face was surprised. The girl tilted her head and said, "I accidentally met her when I last visited the Ariput estate." At that moment, the girl, trying to reassure, accidentally grabbed the maid for the wrist. This scene remained in the memory of Elena. She repeated it again and again. Suddenly grabbing the maid for the wrist, Elena hesitated until she looked closely at her. Elena did not hide for hints, turned to Martin with a strict tone. Her gaze became more serious and harsh. "Are you a father not yet born baby?" she said. "And the man of otters." With his eyes wide open, he wondered, "Is Lynn pregnant?" The man asked, "Repeat again." "Do you say Lynn is pregnant?" He stood in front of a serious girl. Elena turned away and then, turning her gaze on the boy, said, "I learned about it only because of my women's health." "So you father, yes?" Elena asked, fixing her gaze on her husband. He stopped his lips and lowered his eyes. Suddenly, Tommy shouted, "Logged in. How did you find out, Millie?" The blue-eyed brunette turned to the servant in surprise. The guy immediately realized his mistake and covered his mouth with his hand. Lord looked at him questionfully. "Tommy, did you know it?" "Young sir, let me explain," the guy exclaimed, trying to evade a man who was strongly heading for him. The man grabbed Tommy by his shoulder, and in his eyes, fear. Suddenly, the one who grabbed decided to retreat from the young owner. Brunetta frowned and said with tension, "Tell faster. I want to know everything you know." His look showed pity. On another lawn, where the trees were already dressed in yellow leaves, suddenly a loud female burn. She was pushed away. "Give everything you have or get a ball." The robbers were ordered, forcing women to kneel. "Good, we chose a cart with women and children." The men rejoiced, looking at the prey. At this point, the blonde trembled with horror. One familiar officer from the province told about evil bandits hiding along the roads. This has encouraged Lynn to think about past days of work. The maid said, "Bandits are walking through the roads. If you come across them, it is better to give everything you have. They kill without blinking the eye," the girl said. Suddenly, one of the robbers drew attention to Lynn. "Why don't you give us a bag?" asked the man. The girl, frightened, tried to hide the money under the cape. The man grabbed a bag of money from the girl's hands. She screamed with fear, trying to keep him. "Don't touch him, please." "And what is it?" asked the elderly man, opening the bag of money. They instantly blinded his eyes with his glitter. "Full coins," exclaimed the man, fascinated by looking at all the treasures of the girl. The money was shining brightly, reflecting the light. And here the robber shouted with a joyful exclamation, "Bosie, we have a real jackpot." The girl tried to grasp her husband. "No, you don't even imagine how important this money is. Please turn them," the girl begged, crying out loud. But suddenly at her head was a muzzle of a gun. The girl instantly bit the tongue and the robber addressed her. "Lady," he insisted, "I give you two options." He stood over the girl who lowered his eyes to the floor. Two bandits laughed. Their leader fell. Finally, he turned to the blonde. "Or you give up a bag yourself and keep your life, or you lose both money and life," the robber completed. In the eyes of the girl read disappointment and emptiness. The blonde beau scaffoldly screamed, waving her hand. "Miss, give them it." The girl cast her gaze. Other blonde satellites also began to persuade Lynn, shouting, "Your life is much more valuable." "Just do it," they repeated. "Get up. We will be killed if you give up. Through you, we will all die. Don't annoy it and give it money." And then, after a few moments, the girl finally released her husband. Her hands barely trembled noticeably. The robber jumped on a horse and satisfied. "The prey exceeded my hopes," he exclaimed, full of joy. "I'm in a great mood, so I decided to pardon you." "Forward!" he exclaimed, full of energy. The girl was left on her knees without moving. The girl's companions ran up rapidly to her, asking, "Bandits have gone, you can climb." "Are you goals?" "We should run away until we were confronted with someone else," someone said. Lynn trembled from thought. All the money disappeared. This money was needed to raise a child. Without them, I was powerless. I was aware of Lynn. She was watched by an elderly woman. "What will happen to me now?" said the blonde after being in the port city. She began to wander the streets. "Take care of yourself. And what about dinner?" Well, they got without adventure. The voices were heard. Meanwhile, Lynn has frozen in place. "What do I do?" thought the girl, concentrated with blue eyes on the bag. She quickly opened him. Then the girl got several silver coins. She said that even to remove the room in the hotel, it would not be enough. Finding a job becomes more difficult because the body weighs significantly, the girl thought, supporting her chin with her palm. But suddenly a stranger approached her, approaching. "Ladies," he said. The girl turned in surprise. "We both were in the same carriage," Lynn replied. "Do you have a place to go? Do you know someone in these parts?" The strict old woman asked. "For the first time, I do not imagine what to do next," said the blonde desperately. Hearing this, the old woman thought, lowering her gaze down. She approached and suggested, "Why don't you stay with me today?" Lynn asked. "I am sure you came here not just," said the old woman, leading the guests to her home. "Apparently you are already hungry well. Here, treat," said the woman, stretching out Lynn a whole bunch of various flavors. Blonde, stuttering a little, said, "Thank you very much for dinner." She was answered, "There is nothing. I'm tired of dinner alone. Here, taste the soup," the elderly woman said, stretching the cup. Lynn replied in surprise, "Thank you. The house is too big for a lonely man," the girl thought around. Meanwhile, an elderly woman began to taste food. She was reminded again, "It's a little, but feel free." Lynn gratefully replied, "I appreciate the opportunity to share this meal with you." Finally, having tasted the soup, the girl widely revealed her blue eyes with surprise. She was struck by this taste miracle. Grandma asked if she tasted. Lynn replied, "Very tasty." The old woman smiled. "Do not rush. Food will wait for you." Then the woman said, "I understand that you have experienced a lot, but it is important to eat and try to restore strength." Listening to the advice of an elderly man, the girl frozen for a moment, without tasting a single spoonful of soup. The girl gently touched her belly, thinking, "She is right. I am not alone. I have to focus for the sake of the baby," Grandma said. "There's a free room on the mountain. You can stop there." Lynn replied to this, "Thank you very much. By the way, I was called Rihanna," a woman finally said, introducing herself into a conversation. "Nice to meet you," Lynn answered with a sincere smile. Tommy shouted in confusion, "How can you go now?" The Duke will soon hand you the title. As if not noticing the words of his servant, the man grabbed the bag and sharply closed it. Blue-eyed Brunetta strictly asked, "Do you really think that I should stay in the estate after everything I heard?" After a short pause, the man corrected his hat and strongly stated, "I will go alone." Blue-eyed Brunette, changing the outfit to a modest one, stated, "I need to find Lynn and our still unborn baby." The birds hurriedly left the city, heading in the warm land for wintering. The yellow leaves covered trees that proudly stood over the houses. The man nodded his head and barely smiled. "Welcome to Joe's fruit shop." But suddenly he was interrupted. A stranger lifted a yellowish piece of paper to his forehead. It surprised and scared him. "Reply to me," said that harsh man, demonstrating the merchant portrait of the blonde. He, seeming innocent, frozen in place of fear. "Did you ever see a girl from this portrait?" asked the stranger in a few seconds, pointing to Lynn's image. "It is always crowded here, and it will not be easy to find it," the merchant said, rubbing his forehead. Meanwhile, a harsh man took an apple. In a moment, he was already behind the door of the store when the young man in the trail exclaimed, "Sir, you forgot to pay the item. It is not believed that the search for this stupid girl takes so much time." He muttered under his nose, biting the apple. He smiled noticeably, and the scars on his face became more noticeable. Then he reopened with a threatening whisper. "It is not possible to see a light death.